Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 581, Worries. Powerful warriors at the Soul Sea realm only emerged from sacred places and divine kingdoms. Once a sect had a member at the Soul Sea realm, it would gain the right to establish a sacred place. If an independent warrior reached the Soul Sea realm, then he or she would gain the right to establish a divine kingdom. Central region never had a warrior at the Soul Sea realm. Establishing either a divine kingdom or a sacred place required an endless amount of time and resources, and only a warrior at the Soul Sea realm had the necessary qualifications to become a ruler. Above war fighters were war generals, above war generals were warlords, and above warlords were war sages. The warriors at the Soul Sea realm were much stronger than war sages. Zen was a mere level 10 war fighter, and there was no way he could be a match for a warrior at the Soul Sea realm. Those at the Soul Sea realm had the ability to split heaven and earth and could choose to ascend to the upper world. A warrior at Soul Sea realm needed to only raise a finger if he or she wanted to kill someone like Zen. Was the difficulty of the ultimate test truly this high? Do not worry, these soul symbols are just the memories of the departed. They will suppress their cultivation to the same level as yours, the weapon spirit said. Zen nodded in understanding. Testing a war fighter's potential by setting him up against a warrior at Soul Sea realm was unreasonable. If that had truly been the setup, then there was no doubt that Zen wouldn't even be able to touch his opponent's sleeve before he was exterminated. However, despite the suppression of the warrior's cultivation, Zen's chances of winning were still very low. Whether it was combat experience, law comprehension, or the mastery of life vitality or forceful energy, a warrior at Soul Sea realm was just simply incomparable. Even if the warrior was suppressed to a level 10 war fighter, he would still be able to easily defeat an ordinary warlord. Zen's chances of victory were very slim. However, he was still determined to do his best. Pushing his thoughts of impossibility to the side, Zen took out his long sword from his space ring. Holding it in his hand, he suddenly dashed toward his opponent to strike. The Taoist priest raised his jade sword as well and effortlessly blocked Zen's strike with a ding. The block did not faze Zen, who immediately lifted up his sword in order to deflect the priest's jade sword. However, the jade sword seemed to have a mind of its own as it gently swayed along with Zen's, shadowing its every move. Excellent defense. Wonderful swordsmanship, Zen remarked, awed by his opponent's skills. He had never lost to anyone in swordsmanship after he had comprehended that the greatest truths were the simplest. The priest, however, easily blocked Zen's attack. And while the priest was a soul symbol, it seemed as if he still had emotions. The trace of mockery on his face both surprised and slightly irked Zen. Break it. At that moment, Zen had already exhausted his basic swordsmanship to the limit. His strikes grew more desperate and disordered as he attacked the priest constantly. However, the hand that wielded the jade sword was extremely dexterous. It successfully blocked all of Zen's moves. Ding, 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 ding. Within seconds, Zen had already managed to rain down 100 strikes upon the priest who merely used one move to block all of it. Try as he might, Zen was just unable to deal with the priest's move. His frown deepened and he immediately felt insecure with the flaws in his swordsmanship that he had only realized. The greatest truths were the simplest and each of his moves was streamlined to the extremes, but it was still lacking in flexibility. Sword moves were originally created by humans and basic swordsmanship served as the foundation of all other branches of swordsmanship. However, one couldn't remain stagnant and only focus on the basics forever. Zen had realized that he might have failed to innovate when it came to his sword moves. There should be another level after his current swordsmanship since his basic swordsmanship was not simplified to the extremes. The greatest truths were the simplest while true enlightenment was in nature itself. After the sword moves had been simplified to the extremes, they would then lose their entire meaning of existence. The faint ridicule on the priest's face struck a chord with Zen. He took a few steps back and maintained a certain distance from Zen. A light emanated from Zen's eyes and glowed brighter and brighter as he looked up at his opponent. Comprehension. He felt his breathing quicken as a sense of joy and realization suddenly filled his mind. Ever since he had simplified his basic swordsmanship, Zen hadn't bothered changing it again. However, he felt that his comprehension of sword moves was slowly nearing a new limit as a thin barrier appeared in his mind and prevented him from continuing. But, at that moment, Zen had finally been able to break through that barrier. The extremes of simplified sword moves are nothingness. In other words, no sword moves are stronger than sword moves. Let's see how you'll block this one. No move meant there was no sword move. It shouldn't have had a name since there was technically no move to name anyway, but Zen rolled with it. He held his sword as if he was a child casually stabbing a cushion and did not have any inkling of what true swordsmanship was. This change in method quickly erased the scornful expression on the priest's face, his brows now furrowed in concentration as he faced Zen. Ding! The priest's jade sword blocked Zen's once again. However, Zen casually stabbed his opponent and was able to pierce through his defenses. The point of his sword aimed straight for the priest's heart. The priest retreated a few steps back to avoid Zen's otherwise deadly stab. He hadn't stepped back ever since the fight began, but Zen's no move seemed to be turning the tide around. You can't block it anymore. Zen had figured out the strategy and immediately seized the opportunity. His sword zigzagged its way towards the priest in an extremely weird angle. The priest's jade sword once again blocked the attack, but this time, Zen was able to force his way through the defenses. Both jade and iron swords continued to clash against each other, with the priest now continuously being pushed back, unable to stop the tirade of Zen's attacks. After retreating and being shoved into a corner, the priest had one more trick up his sleeve. A soul-stirring law power erupted from the jade sword along with a sharp burst of lighting that shot right towards Zen's head. The thunder law power that had been contained in that lightning strike had probably been at the 3rd level, and it caused Zen's heart to beat wildly. His guess was that the priest came from the upper world and, with his cultivation of the soul sea realm, it was natural for him to have comprehended the 3rd level of thunder law. Fortunately, the priest's cultivation had been suppressed. Otherwise, Zen would have dropped dead the moment the lightning strike hit him. Break it again. Zen was once again back on track as his iron sword danced in the air, forming a strange line without any rules or restrictions. It looked weird, chaotic even, but it was able to avoid the priest's block and successfully pierce through his heart. Plop! As the iron sword pierced through him, the priest cracked and shattered into fragments before dissipating completely like fine, white ash. Zen inhaled deeply. Did I win? Another pattern fell on his head. The test isn't over yet. Defeating the priest had greatly increased his confidence. He wasn't as apprehensive, nor was he as pessimistic with fighting another suppressed warrior at the Soul Sea realm as he had been before. While Zen took the ultimate test inside the talent tablet, the creatures waiting outside were feeling extremely confused. The test was taking too long. The longest it had taken someone to take the test was 2 hours. Yolanda's name had climbed up to 1st place in less than an hour. But Zen had been inside for 3 hours now. What the heck's going on? What did he encounter inside the talent tablet? Could something have happened? It's already been 3 hours. What's taking him so long? Olivia was already beside herself with worry. Surely Zen did not encounter some kind of mishap, did he? Meanwhile, Elder Jing remained calm and unbothered by all of this. However, he did notice that the number of ogres on the 10th floor was increasing. Chapter 582, Fabian and Jared. Elder Jing's greatest worry was the ogres. As soon as Zen entered the Tower of Sin, he had become the target of a grudge of the ogres. Even then, the ogres would have let him go had Zen's performance not been so outstanding. At least they wouldn't break the rules of the Tower of Sin just to kill Zen. Although the ogres had many seats at the moment, they were still only a quarter of the 100 or so. Breaking the rules of the tower would have to come at a great price for the ogres. But now, the situation was different. They already had the lesson of Amber before, who had helped the Demon Knight rise up rather rapidly. With that in mind, the ogres could not just sit and watch as Zen helped the humans rise up too. Moreover, Zen's name had already surpassed Amber's, and was already sitting neatly in the 1st row. Once a person like him matured, he would be able to wipe out the 2 sacred places of the ogres from the Sea God continent. This was a big problem, and any race was going to be severely worried in face of such imminent danger. Although the ogres were really strong, they were no exception to such fear, and when faced with this level of threat, they were not going to care about any rules. They wouldn't care about the so-called safe area, and would kill Zen at any price, including turning themselves against all the other races. Not only were more ogre warlords entering the 10th floor, the number of demon knight warlords was also increasing now. Suddenly, a bold laughter came from somewhere close by. Following that sound, a sense of great pressure came over everyone present there. All the creatures in the room, who were originally staring at the names on the wall, turned their heads. Another level 10 ogre warlord was walking towards them. Elder Jing, Olivia and the other humans felt a chill in their hearts. Malcolm, one of the seat owners. There were two methods to determine the strength of a race on the Sea God continent. The first was to check the strength of the warriors of their sacred places, and the second was the strength of their seat owners in the Tower of Sin. The ogres had the highest number of seats and their seat owners were usually level 10 warlords. And this ogre in front of them called Malcolm was a seat owner too. Malcolm strode forwards arrogantly, surrounded by a group of warlords. The other races, creatures all gave way under his domineering aura. As for Boris and the other ogre war generals, when they saw Malcolm, they went over to him and raised their fists, placing them on their own chests. This was a unique etiquette of the ogres they followed to greet their members. Malcolm's bell-like eyes stared at the wall. When he saw Zen's name floating high in the first row, he let out a cold laugh. Zen Luo. His talent is so terrifying. He must die. When he steps out of the talent tablet, I am going to take his life. As soon as these words left his mouth, every single creature in the room immediately stopped murmuring and speaking. There was intense silence in the room. The seat owners were the creators of rules of the Tower of Sin, so it was impossible that Malcolm did not know that this was a safe area. This meant that the upper echelons of the ogres had reached an agreement to pay any price to kill Zen. Olivia's expression changed drastically as she bit her lips. Her face was filled with anxiety. Elder Jing's expression was even more unnatural. He pondered for a moment and suddenly asked, Malcolm, if you do this, I'm afraid it won't be in accordance with the rules, right? Malcolm glared at Elder Jing and sneered, who are you? What qualifications do you have to speak to me? Although Elder Jing was one of the strongest human warriors in the Tower of Sin, he was not a seat owner. He was indeed not qualified. Elder Jing's expression changed. In the end, he chose to shut his mouth. Meanwhile, the surrounding creatures were all whispering to each other. Alas, Zen is dead meat. It isn't easy for humans to find someone as talented as him, but he is going to be killed by the ogres. What a pity. There's no other way. If I were an ogre, I would do the same. Who would let such a threat grow? Amidst these discussions, a light voice was suddenly heard. Malcolm, your words seem to be a little too domineering. Do you really not need to follow the rules of the Tower of Sin? As the voice faded away, a gust of cold wind blew from a corner of the room. Out of nowhere, a white and blurry figure appeared not far away, with its shadow constantly flashing. All the creatures in the room had to wipe their eyes repeatedly before they could finally see that it was a human warlord clad completely in white. A level 10 warlord. Today, the 10th floor of the Tower of Sin was a really lively sight. As soon as they saw that person, Elder Jing, Olivia, Dylan, and the other humans immediately went up to him and greeted him politely. Malcolm merely glared at this suddenly appeared person and sneered, Fabian Zhao. What, you're out alone today? Where is Jared Zhou? Don't you two always appear at the same time? The humans had 4 seats at the top of the Tower of Sin, and 2 of them were owned by Fabian Zhao and Jared Zhou. The 2 of them were highly adept at using their swords. With their swords combined, they could even contend against a level 1 war sage. I'm here, a soft voice came from another direction. The speaker was dressed in all black, and if he hadn't uttered these words just now, no one would have noticed him. After the appearance of the 2 human seat owners, the confidence levels of Elder Jing, Olivia, and the other humans slightly increased. However, they knew that the situation was still very dire indeed. In the Tower of Sin, the humans couldn't fight against ogres at all. After all, the human race only had 4 seat owners, but the ogres had more than 20. This was only a glimpse of just how strong the ogres were. How could the humans compete with them? The reason why the ogres had not sent too many of their seat owners down was that they felt that Malcolm alone was enough to deal with the humans. Only a weak race would reveal all of its trump cards in a single breath. Ogres obviously did not need to do that. Fabian Zhao strode over, his gaze falling on Zen's name and his face revealing a look of satisfaction. He then turned towards the ogres and coldly remarked, Malcolm, you can't lay a finger on him. Ogres can't just trample on the rules set by so many races as they please. If you were to break rules just like that, then that would imply that the ogres are going to kill talents from the other races as well. The other races deeply agreed with Fabian's words. No one was willing to be subservient to the ogres. Many races had sent their talents into the Tower of Sin to cultivate because they hoped that these cultivators could grow and help improve the status of their races. If the ogres killed a human talent today, then it stood to reason that they would kill talents of the other races as well in the future. Fabian Zhao was smart enough to involve the other races in this debate. When the creatures of the other races heard this, they felt the same way. That's right, what the ogres plan to do is against the rules. They can defeat Zen in the arena, but killing him in the safe area is totally illegal. The Tower of Sin is everyone's, and it does not belong only to the ogres. Ogres are used to being tyrannical. If they do kill Zen, then the other races will need to analyze and think carefully about whether or not there's a need to start an interracial war and flatten the two sacred places of the ogres to the ground. The two sacred places the ogres had were the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. Most of the races were indeed not a match for the ogres inside the Tower of Sin. But if every single one of the 14 big races on the continent were to join forces, then with the help of the Demon Knight's Amber, trampling over the two sacred places of the ogres was going to be very much possible. This was also the reason why the ogres had given up more than half of their seats in the Tower of Sin earlier on. Malcolm let out a cold snort, looked around at the creatures, and revealed a cold smile. Rules. Haha, rules have always been set by strong warriors. We, the ogres, plan to temporarily abolish the rules of the safe area. What do you say to that? That's a bit unreasonable, isn't it? Just as Malcolm had finished speaking, another tall figure appeared. From the very start of this conversation, Malcolm hadn't had the slightest trace of fear in his heart. Even while facing Fabian Zhao and Jared Zhou combined, he wasn't afraid at all. The 4 human seat owners were but a small problem to the ogres. However, his face revealed a fearful expression at this new voice. He asked in a cold voice, "What? The Demon Knight wants to intervene in this matter?" Whether it was the Tower of Sin or the Sea God continent, only the Demon Knight was able to fight evenly with the ogres. If the Demon Knight were going to side with the other races, the situation was going to become extremely troublesome for the ogres. This was the reason why Malcolm was so afraid. Chapter 583, Concession and Dispute. The tall and slender figure slowly approached with several Demon Knight Ward generals following closely behind her. The members of the Demon Knight were mostly women and the perfect race was almost entirely dominated by females. So many male creatures of all races could not look away at the sight of them. The men's gazes were filled with greed and impure thoughts about the Demon Knight women. However, they were to keep their lust and perversion to themselves. The moment they stared at the Demon Knight woman at the helm, they immediately felt their eyes burn as if they were being melted by a hot flame. Ah, my eyes, they hurt, I can't see anything. Am I going blind? They all howled and screamed. Why did you look? How dare you gaze at a woman as powerful as her with lust and desire? She is Madeline, one of the seat holders of the Demon Knight in the Tower of Sin. Those who look at her with impure thoughts will only get hurt. I heard that she's only a 10th level warlord but her soul has already stepped into the Fighting Soul realm. Fighting Soul realm, my word, some of the war sages have not yet even reached that. Not everyone in the Soul Sea realm possesses a soul at the Fighting Soul realm. They say a soul like that is extremely powerful and will not be damaged by attacks from a normal soul. A look of surprise was evident in Madeline's eyes as she looked upon the wall filled with names. Even though she had already received the news that a 10th level human war fighter had gotten his name on the first row, seeing it with her own eyes still caused her a lot of shock and disbelief. A human warrior, how could he be so talented? He was even stronger than the Demon Knight's Amber. Madeline took a glance at Fabian and Jared who had stepped forward upon her arrival. Madeline, the rules were made in accordance with the 14 races, agreement, Fabian said. Are we really going to let the ogres ignore that and repeal the rules? Fabian looked at the crowd and, with a booming voice, stated his declaration, if any of you have the ability to kill Zen in the arena, then we, humans, will naturally not say a word. However, if any attempt upon Zen's life is made outside the arena and in the safe zone, then we'll have a problem. He knew humans were too weak and they would never be able to negotiate fairly with the ogre race. Fabian could only pin his hopes on the Demon Knight. The Demon Knight held 16 seats at the top of the tower, second only to the ogres, and they were incomparably stronger. Despite having fewer seats, the Demon Knight members did not fear the ogres at all. Malcolm stared hard at Madeline's beautiful face. The Demon Knight's interference was something the ogres did not want. It would be extremely troublesome for them if the Demon Knight got involved with this issue. Ultimately though, the decision lay with Madeline. With a faint smile that had the ability to move any man's soul, she voiced out her thoughts loud and clear: the Demon Knight will not interfere in this matter. Despite the grudges both the Demon Knight and the ogres had with each other, it could not be denied that both races shared the same interests and goals. They absolutely could not allow the humans to rise in power and become stronger. The rise of one race meant the fall of another, given the extreme competition for the Sea God continent's limited resources. Right now, the Demon Knight had become one of the strongest races, even overshadowing the ogre race because of Amber's strength and remarkable achievements. However, their race produced and cultivated offspring at a much lower rate than others. Compared to the ogres, the Demon Knight had fewer resources and smaller population. Though they did not like the ogres, the Demon Knight could not allow the humans to rise. Therefore, Madeline would be happy if the ogres got rid of Zen. There was no need to get her entire race involved in this troublesome matter. Madeline's words plunged the hearts of Fabian, Jared, Elder Jing, and Olivia into disappointment. Zen was too impressive and what they had feared would happen because of that. On the other hand, Malcolm was feeling giddy and had a sinister smile plastered on his face. With the Demon Knight refusing to get involved, it would not be hard for him to deal with Zen. All he needed to do was to wait for him to walk out of the Talon Tablet and immediately kill him. The ogres should have already taken action and killed Zen before he reached the 10th floor. They had greatly underestimated Zen's strength by sending a night group assassin who was too weak to eliminate his target. When Malcolm was lost in thought, his musings were interrupted by Madeline's voice. However, the rules of the Tower of Sin were jointly made and agreed upon by the 14 races. If the ogres want to break the rules, I think they should give an appropriate explanation. Her words greatly surprised those present. Madeline, what do you mean by that? Malcolm asked, enraged by what she had just said. Madeline, on the other hand, was calm and collected. Everyone has to pay the price for breaking the rules, she said. If you ogres violate the agreed upon terms and kill a human talent outside the arena, at the very least, you should compensate the humans for their loss. Otherwise, how will you be able to explain this matter to the other races? The Demon Knight followed rules with rigidity as these rules had been set by strong masters to create peace and order. If someone willfully ignored the parameters set by the masters and did not face any repercussions, then the others would follow suit, creating chaos for the entire group. The Tower of Sin could fall into the chaos that it had once been plunged into. If that happened, talents from various races wouldn't be able to safely cultivate and would face all kinds of assassinations. Without the rules, all races would act recklessly. It was not something that the Demon Knight wanted to see. The ogres could certainly break the rules, but they had to pay the price. Otherwise, why would they need to strive for seats in the Tower of Sin? Why would they need the rules? Malcolm sneered, compensation. We can offer compensation. As long as Zen dies, our Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and Dread Ogre Sacred Place are willing to bestow the humans with 10 low-grade sacred weapons. Jared was immediately infuriated by his words, 10 low-grade sacred weapons. Do you think of us as beggars? A sacred weapon was indeed precious, but it wasn't extremely rare in the sacred place. The Purple Heart Sacred Place itself had at least 20 low-grade sacred weapons. The human race would not compromise even if the ogres gave them 100, let alone 10 sacred weapons. Zen was a priceless super talent that should be cherished and protected. Besides, sacred weapons could only realize their true potential in the hands of a master. Malcolm sneered, 10 sacred weapons and that's it. I do not discuss with you humans, understand? Fabian scoffed and shook his head. It seems that you are still intent on ignoring the rules, he said. Do you honestly think you can persuade us to give up on our super talent's life by giving us so little? Malcolm was about to retort when Boris suddenly interrupted, there's no need to argue with them. I have a solution. Malcolm huffed, you have a way to solve this. Tell me right now. Since those humans insist that we obey the rules, then we should give them what they want, Boris said. We don't need to compensate them with 10 sacred weapons. When Zen comes out of the Talon Tablet, I'll challenge him and kill him on the arena. His words were confident as if he already knew who the winner of the battle was before it even began. Malcolm, Fabian, and Jared all showed an expression of interest with Boris's proposal. Fabian and Jared knew the human race did not have any bargaining chips in their hands to negotiate with the ogres. Their best bet was to get Zen up in that arena and win. His victory would serve to further strengthen the importance of the rules and help humans gain the other races' support. Malcolm, on the other hand, thought differently. Boris, to him, was the most outstanding talent in the ogre's 2 sacred places, and his cultivation base was a full cultivation realm higher than Zen's. The gap between a 10th level war fighter and a 10th level war general was too great. Therefore, Malcolm had no doubts that Boris would be able to kill Zen in the arena. This method would ensure that the ogres wouldn't be breaking any rules, so there would be no need to compensate the humans and they could legally get rid of Zen. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. In the unlikely event that Boris did fail, the ogres would still be able to ignore the rules and kill Zen. Malcolm let out a roaring laugh. I agree with this suggestion. What do you humans think? Fabian and Jared chose not to say anything. The ogres' agreement to fight in the arena was already a kind of concession. Although their hearts were full of worry, Fabian and Jared only nodded their heads. Olivia faintly sighed as she looked up at Zen's name shining on the wall. She wasn't an idiot and obviously knew the ogres' malicious intentions. Even if Zen defeated Boris, the ogres might not also be willing to abide by the rules. Only hatred and competition existed between the 2 races, after all. Zen should not have entered the Tower of Sin. He should have just slowly grown and enhanced his cultivation in the Purple Heart sacred place. At the very least, he should have had enough strength to face off against these ogre warlords before he entered the tower. That should have been the perfect plan. With his talent, he probably doesn't even need the tower's help. As long as he focuses on his cultivation, a breakthrough isn't way too far off. Ah, why have things come to this? Olivia thought morosely, regretting Zen's choices for him. Of course, she had no idea that Zen did not have the time nor the luxury to cultivate slowly. His sister waited for him to rescue her and, with each passing day, his worries only increased since he felt that there was no time at all. The Tower of Sin was the only place where he could quickly raise his cultivation base. He had no other choice. Besides, a talent would only grow stronger and far more powerful after going through a life or death experience. A peaceful environment could never yield an awe-inspiring hero. Everyone fell silent upon the presentation of this solution. The only thing to do now was to wait for Zen to come out of the talent tablet and accept Boris's challenge. It wasn't the perfect plan, but it ultimately resolved the dispute. However, 4 hours had already passed. Why was Zen undergoing such a long test? What exactly did he encounter inside the talent tablet? Zen was completely unaware of the huge dispute happening outside because of him. At that moment, he was currently dealing with the soul symbols one by one. The masters of these soul symbols had exceptionally powerful cultivation bases, and it was still extremely difficult for Zen to defeat them despite the suppression of their cultivation bases to that of a 10th level warfighter. The 9th soul symbol, Zen had just managed to destroy another master's soul symbol. He had exhausted almost all his methods but, in the end, had to rely on the fighting soul to disturb the opponent's mind before he managed to kill him. How many soul symbols do I have to deal with? Zen asked. 10, the weapon spirit said faintly. You only need to defeat 10 master's soul symbols for you to pass the final test. 10, then this is the last one. With this, Zen noticed that the serrid patterns started to disappear until there was only one left right in front of him. The pattern suddenly lunged at Zen and, with a powerful flash of light, a person appeared. The light blinded Zen for a few seconds before he could look at the one standing in front of him. Who was he? Astonishment was written all over Zen's face. Although the person in front of him had eyes and nose the same way all others had eyes and noses, the aura he exuded was very strange, and it reminded Zen of the similar feeling he had when he met Lily, his sword spirit. Back then, he had been shocked by her appearance. Her slender legs and beautiful face were aesthetically perfect, and Zen could only marvel at such a wonderful creation. Only after arriving at the Sea God continent did Zen realize that his horizons were simply limited. The Demon Knight was a perfect race with men and women at the height of beauty and aesthetic splendor. However, the Demon Knight members were not humans, and their long, pointed ears were physical proof of this fact. The person in front of Zen right now looked like a genuine human male. Ears, eyebrows, eyes, body. His appearance was the same as a normal human's, and nothing seemed out of place as Zen carefully looked him up and down. Zen praised this person in his heart, for he never thought such a perfect human could exist in this world. The person, was flawless and perfect, and his perfection was the reason why Zen couldn't be too sure that he was really a human being. Is he a real human? He voiced his thoughts out loud. He can't be regarded as a human being, the weapon spirit replied. Zen frowned. Then what race does he belong to? He asked. He is the owner of the Tower of Sin. A member of the celestial position race. The weapon spirit's revelation almost popped Zen's eyes out of his sockets. The celestial position race? What kind of race is that? Why do they look so much like humans? The demon knight was a perfect race, but this man in front of him, despite being perfect himself, looked as if he had more in common with humans. I am unable to answer this question. The weapon spirit replied. His soul symbol appears here, Zen said and bit his lip in thought. Then does that mean that the owner of the Tower of Sin has already died? Right, this is the last soul symbol, the weapon spirit affirmed. As long as you defeat him, you may pass the final test. I see. Zen's face no longer showed any doubt. No matter what the celestial position race was, as long as he defeated this perfect man, Zen would pass the test. This time, it wasn't Zen who made the first move. There was no mockery or hesitation. The last soul symbol went and charged towards Zen in swift, assured steps. No waves of forceful energy and life vitality. His cultivation base is suppressed to my level. Is he planning to use only his physical body to fight against me? Zen thought to himself, slightly confused and alarmed at how things had started. However, he quickly recovered and got himself ready. If that's the case, then let's see how much power is stored in that perfect body of you. He put away his long sword and met with the man head-on, also using his physical body to ram into his opponent. Zen was confident with his physical strength since only a few people could keep up with him in the Sea God continent and even in the boundless world. After all, his body was a high-grade fairy weapon and it was enough to turn Zen into a mean fighting machine. Bang! The two of them collided in the most barbaric fashion with a loud bang indicating the amount of strength they had put into their tackles. The collision produced a force that was so strong that it sent the two of them reeling backward, away from each other. Zen flew a couple of feet in the air before landing painfully on the cold, hard floor. However, despite the pain he should be feeling, his mind was more focused on the shocking fact that his opponent was still alive. Just then, a primary-level warlord hit by Zen's attack would have been severely wounded after the collision, but it seemed his perfect opponent was only thrown a few feet backward. Sure, they were both thrown a good few feet backward, but compared to the distance Zen was thrown, the perfect man's retreat distance was significantly shorter. Indeed, it is such a powerful physical body. It's not the slightest bit weaker than my fairy weapon body. Doubt also appeared on the perfect man's face. Despite being a mere soul symbol, he had still inherited the emotions of his previous master and regarded Zen's powerful physical body as inconceivable. Again, Zen roared as he circulated the power of the dragon scales in his body, activating 100 scales. Bang! There was another violent force as the two collided once again. Zen was pushed back 100 feet, but his opponent was pushed back for 150 feet. Again, bang! Zen continued to unfurl the dragon scales power bit by bit, increasing his strength gradually. Over time, the distance Zen would be thrown back decreased while his opponent moved farther and farther backward. On their next collision, a stream of blood flowed out of the man's mouth. Golden blood, the sight of it solidified Zen's belief that his opponent was not human. How could a mere human being possess golden blood? The perfect man wiped away the blood from his mouth. Then he finally realized that he would not be able to win this battle with his physical strength alone. If this continued, he would be the one collapsing in the end. The perfect man changed his pose and suddenly clenched one of his hands into a fist. Faint traces of light appeared around his hand before forming a powerful-looking vortex. That's the forceful energy, Zen thought to himself. Although he was of the celestial position race, he still chose to refine his body. Since that's the case, I'll also show him my body refining technique. At that moment, victory was no longer Zen's goal. What he hoped instead was a breakthrough. Stellar body. Zen had never used the stellar body in actual combat, but now he would finally get a chance. Now, he would see how powerful the transcendent divine might truly was. Chapter 584, The Highest Authority. In that instant, Zen utilized his comprehension on the general principles of the transcendent divine might and subsequently channeled the power of the stars into his body. There happened to be a total of 8 moves in the first part of the stellar body. According to what the Red Dragon had stated before, the 8 moves in the first part corresponded with the 8 path platforms. Every time Zen managed to build a path platform, he would then be able to strike a move against his foe. However, as of the moment, Zen had only unlocked one path platform. It was a fortunate thing that the 100 meetings platform corresponded to the first move of the stellar body, which was the star shakes the earth. If someone happened to take a glimpse of the sky, they would immediately observe that in the vast and distant darkness that stretched across the skies, a glowing star all of a sudden emitted an intense sort of bright starlight. From a great distance, the starlight, which was initially the size of a speck of dust, now appeared like a small pigeon egg. Needless to say, it seemed as if the light had magnified over 100 times in an astonishingly short moment. This was the exceptional ability of the stellar body. Such an amazing power enabled any cultivator to absorb the force of the star into his own body and simply enhance the cultivator's own abilities. At the present, it was indeed a marvelous thing to see as Zen's own body was enveloped in a faint glow reminiscent of starlight. Considering that he had only managed to be connected with one star thus far, the starlight that emitted from his frame was rather dim. Nonetheless, it would be significantly better if he were to be connected with more stars in order that the starlight around his body could gradually become brighter. In the end, the goal was to make him give the impression of a shining star. Realistically speaking, the power of the star condensed by the stellar body was fundamentally different from the star power formed by the sun-moon-stars picture. After all, the spiritual projection method of the sun-moon-stars picture presented him a more concrete and tangible feeling as the power needed to be obtained by relying on the act of visualizing the stars. On the other hand, the stellar body itself could directly utilize the real power of the star. Evidently, Zen could not simply judge which method was better just by weighing their differences. This was due to the fact that the stellar body was known as the transcendent divine might, while the sun-moon-stars picture was an inheritance from the fairy palace. Another palpable difference was that the former was a supreme unique technique for body refiners, whereas the latter represented the pinnacle of the life vitality system. Even though he had cultivated both these two skills, he could not easily mention which was better for him to use. Moreover, he had thought that both of these methods had great potential and that he ought to maximize their capabilities. Then again, he was currently located in the sea god continent and the desire to focus on his body refinement was still there. Therefore, it was ultimately necessary for him to experiment and assess the full power of the stellar body. As soon as the starlight condensed around Zen's form, he wasted no time at all as he suddenly charged towards his opponent. In the beginning, Zen did not have a single clue as to which level the owner of the Tower of Sin had reached in terms of strength. It was not something Zen could simply guess or imagine. Furthermore, it was similar to that situation wherein he had no idea regarding the strength mobilized by the leader of the Dragon Abyss Palace in the genuine dragon world. This was attributed to the untimely fact that they were both much more powerful than him and it was beyond his capabilities to figure out their cultivation levels. However, the kind of strength this person in front of him possessed did not matter to him at all, owing it to the fact that he had suppressed his cultivation level to that of a 10th level warfighter. With a determined expression on his face, Zen was confident that he would be able to defeat him. Witnessing the movements of the person facing him, he noticed that his opponent's fist flashed with a hazy beam as his forceful energy continuously swirled and condensed, eventually forming a vortex at his fingertips. If he were not in this empty space, Zen suspected that he could have been capable of absorbing every material thing in this world. As the vortex persistently absorbed the forceful energy and transformed it into a glowing beam of radiance that blanketed his fist, the man turned his head to glance at Zen's frame with indifference painting his features. Upon noticing the faint light covering Zen's body, he raised an eyebrow in surprise and said, "No wonder you are able to arrive at the stage of the ultimate test. I expected less from a mere human war fighter, but you actually possess the transcendent divine might." The man's voice faded away as if he was deep in thought before speaking up once again. "Furthermore, it seems to be the case that what you are using is the transcendent divine might of Lord of Stars." Just before that moment, Zen had been saving up his strength and was prepared to strike the first move of the stellar body. Upon hearing the words the other man had uttered, he suddenly stopped in his tracks and hesitantly asked, "The transcendent divine might of Lord of Stars? Who is that Lord of Stars?" He tilted his head to one side as he addressed his opponent. According to what the Red Dragon had explained to him before, he was not the one responsible for creating the stellar body. Because of this, the Red Dragon only retained the first part of the book with the additional warning to Zen that the stellar body that he taught him was actually incomplete. Narrowing his eyes suspiciously at the other man, Zen did not expect that the owner of the Tower of Sin was able to distinguish that the cultivation method he used was the stellar body. With a faint smile that stretched across his lips, the man talked to him once more. You are lucky to be able to possess the transcendent divine might when you are merely a war fighter. As for your question, you have to find the answer yourself. He dramatically paused before looking at him in challenge. If you want to pass the ultimate test, you have to resist my punch first. As soon as he had finished speaking, the man clenched his fist in preparation. The moment he tightened his grip, the meridians on his fist bulged on one by one. In normal circumstances, a human's meridians would appear to take on a greenish hue, but this man was certainly not ordinary as his meridians reflected the color of a brilliant gold. Celestial position devour, he yelled. Within the span of a second, the forceful energy that the man harbored for a long time suddenly erupted. Although the man had lowered himself to a 10th level war fighter, the power that exuded from the man still shocked Zen and left him speechless. The reason why Zen momentarily halted his offensive move just now was because he was curious about the origin of the stellar body and he wanted to ask the other man what he knew about it. Judging from the way the man spoke and replied to his inquiries, it was crystal clear to Zen just then that he did not plan to discuss it with him. Huffing to himself, Zen promptly dropped the matter and went all out to strike his move. Star shakes the earth. If there happened to be spectators present to watch how the battle unfolded, they would have been terribly stunned and taken aback upon seeing the intense scene of their fight. Since both of them were now 10th level war fighters, it was unexpected for them to release powers that seemed far beyond the abilities of warrior generals. Furthermore, it was even almost a frightening sight to behold, given the fact that it was impossible even for an ordinary warlord to unleash such an explosive power of forceful energy like they had just done. The potent forceful energy within Zen's body unceasingly exploded and the power of the star flooded into his fist at the same time. After the brightness dimmed a little, his fist flashed with dazzling starlight, as if Zen was holding a small star on the palm of his hand. In the blink of an eye, Zen powerfully threw a punch at his opponent. On the other side of the battle, his opponent's punch was also something to be reckoned with. Just as the potent forceful energy abruptly surged out violently from his fist and created a huge vortex, the center of it was immediately noticeable. The radiance of his fist was strikingly similar to the image of a raging seawater. Swish! The sound of an uncontrolled flood of water was loud enough for it to leave a faint ringing in their ears. As the two powerful energies collided with each other, they consequently emitted rays of brilliant light that could have been able to make other people's eyes go blind. At this moment, it seemed to be no longer a confrontation of the fists. Rather, the battle of forceful energies had just begun. The man who rose as the victor would have won the contest of strength. Blinking rapidly as a result from the vivid brightness, Zen struggled to see his surroundings clearly. However, he understood right at that very moment that what he needed to do was to keep moving forward and tear the soul symbol in front of him into pieces. It was in that instance when he realized that the power of the star was far beyond what Zen could ever imagine. Upon facing the punch of the man who owned the Tower of Sin, he deliberated by himself a couple of things he had observed. Firstly, if Zen employed the malicious wheel of life and death and unleashed all of the malicious aura that was enclosed within, it might not be enough to shatter this vortex in front of him. Secondly, Zen was not certain whether the skill his opponent was using at that moment was the transcendent divine might or not. Even if it were not, Zen fathomed that it was rather close to it. Moreover, the power of this vortex was not something the malicious wheel of life and death could withstand. Fortunately for Zen, with the added boost from the power of the star, his punch was akin to a sharp and hot knife cutting through soft butter. Despite the fact that the light from the power of the star he emanated was considerably dim, it had never ceased to glow. Through the overwhelming energy the light spots continuously released, it did not take long before Zen finally broke the vortex and smashed his fist on the man. As the man in front of him was only a soul symbol and his body was merely formed by the memories that remained from it, what Zen had just defeated was not a real person in the truest sense. As a result, the exact moment Zen's fist first landed on him, his body was immediately torn into pieces, leaving behind only a head that hovered above in the air. As the floating head continued to stare at him coldly, the man managed to give Zen a calculating leer before declaring, "Good talent and strength. You can gain the recognition of the celestial position." "What is so good about getting the recognition of the celestial position?" Zen asked, confused about what the other had meant. The faintest of smiles appeared on the man's face, seemingly amused at something only he knew at the time. "Actually, there are no benefits. This is your fate now." "My fate?" He stared unblinkingly. "What fate are you talking about?" Zen inquired with a frown, more puzzled than ever. However, the floating head gradually dissipated, the sound of his voice slowly fading away into nothingness. Nevertheless, Zen's ears managed to pick up on the last sentence the man had uttered before disappearing completely. When the time comes, you will know. Do not weep then. Upon hearing the parting words of his former opponent, Zen was perplexed by what the underlying meaning of his message could have been. Do not weep when the time comes. He repeated softly, crossing his arms against his chest. What did that even mean? Zen muttered to himself as he started to stroke his chin absent-mindedly. Alas, no one was present to directly answer Zen's questions. After the soul symbol had completely disappeared without a trace, Zen once again stood alone in the endless space. Absorbed in his own thoughts, Zen almost missed the weapon spirit's voice as it suddenly resounded from everywhere. Young man, you have passed the ultimate test, the voice declared. What is my reward? Even after having entered the test for so long, Zen still had trouble trying to understand what exactly was going on around him. Feeling bouts of irritation ever since it had started, he just wished that all these masters he had encountered just explicitly told him what they wanted to convey in the first place. Looking back at what he experienced, the owner of the Tower of Sin behaved in the exact same way as the Immortal Mist did. Their tendency to suddenly drop the topic when it came to the most important and intriguing part, along with leaving Zen hanging in suspense, annoyed him to no end. Upon reminiscing on his past escapades, he rubbed his temples in frustration. If he could only curse them. After you pass the ultimate test, you can then enjoy being the highest authority in the Tower of Sin. You are now free to travel within the premises, as well as control everything that happens inside the tower, the voice explained, addressing Zen's concerns. What? Emotions of surprise and satisfaction bubbled up in his chest at the news presented to him. Doesn't this mean that the Tower of Sin now belongs to me? Well, no. The Tower of Sin is not something you can refine as only the celestial position race can do so, the weapon spirit started to clarify. You have just gained the recognition of the celestial position. Since it is impossible for you to refine it with your current strength, you can only control the tower within a limited range with my help, of course, the formless voice finished, patiently giving Zen a well-deserved explanation. What do you mean? Can you explain further? Give me an example perhaps? The young man persistently asked, fascinated by what he was currently hearing. For example, you can now freely travel through the walls and floors of the Tower of Sin without anyone or anything stopping you on your way. Also, you can kick any living creature out of the Tower of Sin, the weapon spirit stated and completed its spiel. As the voice finished talking, Zen's eyebrows immediately shot up and his mouth was agape at the implications of his new status. Grinning with unbridled excitement, Zen felt his heart pound in anticipation of his new privileges. With a start, it dawned on him that he ultimately had the right to decide who got to live or die among all the creatures in the Tower of Sin. Chapter 585, An Arrogant Name. Zen was not an expert on Sea God continent history, but he had a rough understanding of it thanks to Phoebe from the Demon Knight. The Tower of Sin was a very important place for the many races that lived in the Sea God continent. It was a trial ground directly related to their survival. Due to the innate significance of the tower, it was only natural that the Flaming Ogre's sacred place and the Dread Ogre's sacred place wanted to take possession of it. Unfortunately, that was not something the other races could allow. A soul race's occupation of the Tower of Sin was equal to killing off the other races. Therefore, it was something that must never be allowed to happen, which was why the control of the tower was relegated to different races who were able to get a seat at the top. Other than cultivating in the tower, the dark nether cave at the foot of the tower was also equally important. It couldn't be denied that the Tower of Sin was an indispensable part of a talent's training path. And this was what made the Sea God continent and the central region completely different. In order to maintain balance and order, various sacred places contended for their seats and shared joint control of the tower, so that it could be a feasible public training ground for their talents. Rules were agreed upon and set, so that warriors might be able to train and flourish. But now, Zen had just been given the right to eliminate anyone from the tower. From the war fighters on the lower floors to those so-called seat owners at the top, all of their lives were now in the palm of Zen's hands. Such power and responsibility had him tingling all over. Now that I have passed the ultimate test, it is time for me to go out, he said. Of course, the weapon spirit replied. Remember, as a weapon spirit, I am an omnipresent entity within the Tower of Sin. If you want to exercise your right, just call me. Zen nodded in understanding before heading for the entrance. Outside the talent tablet, the crowd continued waiting in bated breath for Zen's return. The amount of time he had spent inside was several times greater than that of the average person, and the people waiting for him were growing restless. Yolanda had climbed up to the first row like Zen, but it took her much less time. Why hasn't Zen come out yet? Maybe we don't need to kill him personally anymore. He may have already died inside. This has never happened before. The talent tablets test isn't dangerous. It's only a test of the limits of one's talent. The discussions upset Olivia. The humans were clearly under a lot of pressure, and they'd be plunged into a deeper crisis if Zen did truly die inside. However, the buzz of speculation suddenly came to a halt when the wall suddenly began shaking. Olivia's thin eyebrows were suddenly raised in anticipation. Is he out? It wasn't just her. Elder Jing, Fabian, and Jared were also paying close attention. In fact, the humans, ogres, demon knight, and all races were all nervously staring at the shaking wall. In front of everyone present, the words, Zen Luo, that originally shone bright on the first row, suddenly disappeared. A loud uproar immediately followed. Zen's name is gone. How could it have disappeared? What the heck? Did he really die inside? Shoot, that can't be right. There was once a talent who was killed in the arena immediately after he stepped out of the talent tablet. His name didn't disappear. How do you explain Zen's name disappearing then? Why are you asking me? I have no idea either. The disappearance of Zen's name resurrected the speculations of the audience, who were once again abuzz with discussion. The names could be pushed down by the increasing number of names, but it was impossible for them to disappear. Only a few names were written on the first row. Yesterday, only 5 names were written on the first row, and none of them were from the Sea God continent. But in just one day, 2 names were suddenly added to the list. For thousands of years, the first row remained sparse, but the sudden entrance of talents changed it all in one single day. Perhaps the next talent would come tomorrow, or the next week, or maybe not until the next few thousand years. No one truly knew what the future held. However, one of the names had mysteriously disappeared. While the crowd gossiped and theorized, Olivia was almost trembling with worry as she continuously prayed in her heart for that young man's safety. Zen, please, you have to be all right. The tremors on the wall grew more intense, silencing the crowd once more. Specks of golden light began to appear above the first row and cracks began to form one after the other. The cracks grew larger before forming into coherent, golden words, celestial position. What are those words? Celestial position, what is that? I don't know, but the light is really dazzling. It was true. The way Zen's name shone earlier was nothing compared to the bright, golden light the 2 words emanated as they were written on the wall. It wasn't over. Cracks continued to appear on the bottom of celestial position, shining and forming into 2 familiar words, Zen Luo. Celestial position, Zen Luo. Do my eyes deceive me? Isn't that Zen's name? Zen's name just moved to the top of the entire list. Wow, and his name is even 10 times larger than those below. Zen is truly too monstrous. The crowd was once again driven into stunned silence. Celestial position. Malcolm mouthed the words, face filled with shock as he looked up at the human's golden name. Fabian and Jared looked at each other in disbelief. Fabian, do you remember the book of celestial position stored on top of the tower? Jared asked. Fabian nodded in confirmation. Yes, he said. According to the book, the Tower of Sin used to belong to a race called the Celestial Position, but no further information is recorded. Jared shook his head and sighed. I wonder just what Zen has encountered when he took the test. Ho ho, whatever happened inside doesn't matter. His name is now above all these other talents. Fabian said. The sight of Zen's name written in bold, golden letters erased all worries in Olivia's heart. Pride welled up at her chest and she felt as if she was about to cry. It was truly a prodigious moment for the entire human race. Even Dylan, who was extremely jealous of Zen, also felt the excitement. For years, humans had been bullied inside the Tower of Sin. They all had to behave cowardly and learn their place because of their race's lackluster strength. Zen's accomplishments today changed all that, and they all felt as if they could finally walk the halls of the tower with their heads held high with no fear of persecution. This talent of ours will be hard to beat. A lot of them wanted to roar out those words. Madeline's eyes gazed up icily at the golden name. The demon knight was not a bloodthirsty race. They might be strong and arrogant at times, but they carried certain dignity in their bones. She was very happy for Zen, truly, from the bottom of her heart. She was happy for him. It wasn't every day one saw a talent such as him rise and make his way to the top. She truly wanted to see just how far this human boy she had never even met would go. However, there was still a bigger matter to consider. The human race's reproduction rate was far greater than the demon knights. Given their larger population, their chances of fostering more talents would be much higher than theirs or even the ogres. That possibility threatened the survival of her entire race, so, despite being happy for Zen, she still hoped for the ogres' swift elimination of the human boy. Let nature take its course, Madeline thought to herself. A high talent such as Zen was no doubt also endowed with great fortune. The ogres would have a hard time killing him. But there was still that challenge from Boris. Should Zen defeat Boris in the arena, the ogres would then gain the perfect excuse to not abide by the rules and kill him directly. With Malcolm's strength as a 10th level warlord, Zen wouldn't stand a chance. And, even if Fabian and Jared were able to protect Zen, there was still the matter of the ogres holding the majority of the seats in the tower. 4 human seat owners against over 20 ogre seat owners. It would be like eggs dashing themselves against rocks. No matter how great Zen's luck was, he had now truly reached a dead end. From how Madeline saw it, the human boy was doomed. A slight smirk found its way on her face with this conclusion. Just as everyone was admiring the golden words on the wall, the door finally opened. When Zen entered, a small crowd of people saw him off. Now, as he made his exit, the small crowd had become a black mass of creatures from all manner of races. He was taken aback at the sight. Why are there so many? He quickly looked around and was immediately comforted at the familiar sight of Olivia and walked over to her. Olivia's eyes were watery as if she had been holding her tears the entire time. "You're finally out," she said, her gentle voice trembling. Zen frowned. "What's wrong?" he asked. Olivia shook her head and smiled before pointing behind him. "Look over there." Zen turned his head and was immensely shocked at the sight of the 2 golden words that had been carved onto the stone wall. He knew that the weapon spirit was the one who wrote his name there, but was it really necessary to make his name so big? Wasn't that too arrogant? He was speechless. Had he known that this would happen, he would have had stopped the weapon spirit from doing so. Chapter 586, Being Made Fun of. Oaks may fall, but the reeds can withstand a storm. Is it not better to bend than to break? Destruction always pursues the strong. Olivia knew this, and so did Zen. Zen had no idea about his own capabilities before he entered the talent tablet. Even if he did have countless skills, was it really necessary to have that label, celestial position, added right before his name? What did it even mean, anyway? It must have meant so much validation for such a recognition. Suddenly, a majestic aura rained down before Zen. He turned around and saw that it was an ogre warlord. Even if he had seen a number of them in his existence, he was still in awe every single time. However, the majority of them were not friendly at all. A 10th level warlord? Zen's eyebrows furrowed out of intense curiosity. "That's an ogre seat owner," Olivia whispered into Zen's ear, eyes fixated on the creature right before them. "You brat, you think you're some hotshot, huh, having carved your name this big?" Malcolm's voice rang throughout the entire town, causing everyone's ears to ring. The words that came out of Malcolm's mouth gave Olivia some palpitations. Her heart started to pump loudly, as if threatening to escape her chest. It had been one of the many things she feared. If Malcolm killed Zen at that very moment, the humans could have done nothing but watch. "What's the problem then?" Zen asked, his eyebrows twitching from the anger that was brewing inside of him. Unlike most, he wasn't at all afraid of Malcolm. Strange gazes were everywhere. Some expressions were so easy to spell out. Almost all of them were wondering where in the world Zen mustered up such confidence to stand up to someone like Malcolm in that certain way. Is he asking for his death? They all thought to themselves. Every race that existed would have agreed that someone as skillful as Zen had an unfortunate fate. Ogres came for someone like him. They wanted him gone. The war between the humans and the ogres was personal, so the other races just watched the ongoing banter from a distance, staying safe from that kind of trouble. Malcolm let out a laugh so sinister that it crept almost everyone out in sight. "I don't think you have any idea what you're getting into, kid." Arrogantly and in great strides, he walked towards Zen. All of a sudden, a black figure accompanied by a white one appeared beside Zen in a flash. Those two were Fabian and Jared, who were on full alert to prevent Malcolm from causing Zen harm. A strange sound engulfed the area. The forceful energy was continuously circulating around Malcolm's hands. It was purplish-black in color, and exuded such force. He never showed Fabian and Jared any kind of respect. He even laughed coldly into their faces and said, "I'm going to make you pay." Combining Fabian's and Jared's powers would have been a mismatch against Malcolm. They were very powerful, too. But, then what? It was inevitable that the human race would eventually lose against the ogres. What was worse would be the elimination of the human war fighters, generals, and lords from the Tower of Sin. It would go downhill from there. Things would take a turn for the worst. If both the Flaming and Dread Ogre sacred places decided to make their move, they had the ability to wipe out the Purple Heart sacred place from the Sea God continent. The humans would result to nothing. That was the sorrow of the weak. Their lack of strength left them no choice but to endure. It was either that, or they died a bloody death. Even if Fabian and Jared were not afraid of Malcolm, they flinched at his words. Protecting Zen was essential, but the human race was still the top priority. It was never clear to Zen how the black and white duo came about, but he had a slight clue about what purpose they served when it came to him. The Purple Heart sacred place desperately wanted to protect him from the ogres who had only one thing in mind: have him killed. The rules of the safe zone didn't seem to work at that specific time. It was proven that even the strongest person could be attacked. Zen laughed to himself but refused to say anything. He wanted to see for himself how else things could go. Zen, I'd like to challenge you, Boris said, taking a step forward and surprising everyone with his gesture during the commotion. Come on, then, Zen responded with a small smile playing on his lips. Without any hesitation, he just agreed. He believed he could take on anything and anyone. Glancing at Boris, Malcolm was sure he didn't want to make any move. Like what Boris had told him, Zen died and the trouble ended. The earlier, the better. By then, no one would have the right to mock the ogres. If Boris failed, Malcolm still stood a chance. All he wanted at that very moment was to press Zen, but he never expected for the kid to be fearless of him. A reaction would have sufficed, but the boy didn't tremble in his presence. Seeing Zen's nonchalant expression, Malcolm had the strongest urge to tear him to pieces right then and there. The heated confrontation between two races ended when Zen accepted Boris' challenge. Zen left first, and Olivia followed. At the end of the day, their goal was to fight in the arena, not in the streets. All members of the human race had occupied the arena, so Boris also took a step and led the ogres to where the action would take place. The other creatures that had also gathered in front of the talent tablet also moved to the arena. Not long, the spectator stands all over the area were packed to the brim. It was loud and dusty, a perfect day for a duel. The Tower of Sin was a world of pyramid. The number of war fighters on the first 5 floors was several times more than the number of war generals on the 6th floor. From the 6th floor onward, the number had begun to decrease rapidly. As for the 10th floor, it was occupied by 10th level war generals, where talents from all races gathered. The 10th floor was a force to reckon. In order to reach the higher levels of the tower, the war generals cultivated their skills in the secret room and worked harder than most warriors on the other floors. It was tight. Due to the connection between Boris and Zen, those war generals had sneaked out of the secret room to watch, too. In one of the spectator stands sat a young woman dressed in a long, green robe. Her hair floated through the thick air and her eyes were sharp as knives. Her name was Cheryl Mew, a divine-level talent of the Demon Knight. A sight to behold. On the 10th floor in the Tower of Sin, Cheryl and Boris were always compared. The two of them were the most powerful talents among the young throughout the Sea God continent. Keeping to herself at all times, Cheryl had also been doing her training in the secret room. A spell of time law was cast on her training room, which meant that 10 days inside it was 1 day in the outside world. The two, Cheryl and Boris, had fought twice in the past. However, both of the fight resulted in a draw. Despite this, Cheryl still felt like she had suffered defeat. According to the rules of the arena, if both sides fought to a standstill, then they would exchange their lucky light. During those 2 fights, Cheryl had stored up a lot more lucky light than Boris. It was something that rankled her. It was only natural for Cheryl to have something she could take pride in. Being a member of Demon Knight had that effect. Through that training, Cheryl planned to be the first in line and leave Boris behind. That was the exact reason she had spent all of her points on a training room that could interfere with the time flow rate. She was called out of the secret room for this event. Normally, it would piss her off, but knowing that someone had decided to accept Boris' challenge gave her excitement to an unbelievable extent. At that certain time, Cheryl felt a pang of envy towards Boris, for she had her eyes on Zen as well. This guy had achieved the Celestial Position title and had worked his way as a 10th level warfighter. His abilities must be astounding. Crossing his arms over his chest, Malcolm allowed his eyes to travel through the arena. It was true that Zen's talent had been proven by the talent tablet, but talent didn't mean everything for a martial artist. After all, Boris' cultivation was higher than Zen, and from Malcolm's point of view, the possibility of Zen being killed by Boris was very high. If Boris fails to end your life today, Malcolm licked his lips out of eagerness before he continued, I will do it myself. The ogres had already suffered greatly because of Amber, and now, Amber, with her own strength, could harm the existence of the flaming and dread ogre's sacred places altogether. This was unbearable for the ogres. Amber was a threat, and Zen was stronger than her. In the eyes of Malcolm, Zen was already a dead man. It was either him or Boris, who did the deed. Come on, Zen Luo. One of the war generals shouted from one of the stands. His voice echoed throughout the arena, causing the others to hype up as well. Screams from different directions quickly filled the place. Human war generals from the 10th floor began to populate the place, too. Their shouts were loud and impressive. Zen nodded to his fellow humans in the audience, as if saying, let's do this, yeah. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Finally, you're standing before me. Kid, let me tell you this. It seems that your clansmen doubt your victory, Boris sneered. And what do you mean by that? Zen asked with a playful smile. If they know so well that you'd win against me, why do they feel the need to cheer you on? My clansmen don't need to shout my name to let me know they believe in my abilities, Boris answered, not even subtle with his arrogance. Boris, words didn't have a single effect on Zen. There's no point in speaking further. I think most ogres are reckless. You're an exception though, aren't you? Don't stoop so low just to get a reaction from me. If you know so well that you'd win against me, why do you feel the need to use these cheap tricks? Zen mocked his earlier words. You're right, kid. But please, do me a favor and go all out. The thought of you giving your best shot to kill me excites me all the more, Boris stated with a sly smile. The competition wasn't as important as killing Zen. That was how it was for the ogres. That was how much they despised his existence. However, Boris had his own share of selfish thoughts. He truthfully wanted Zen to go all out, so that he challenged himself to give it his all as well. A duel everyone would never forget. I think it's time we stop talking at once. At his words, Zen pulled out his sacred weapon. The light hit its sharp edges. What a way to start the fight. Boris huffed in sheer excitement, pulling out his own weapon. The ogres were of the tall and well-built kind. Their weapons were as sturdy as their bodies. Boris' saber was impressive with its faint red glow on the blade, which was just as sacred as Zen's sword. The very moment Boris raised his weapon, the red glow began to disappear. At the same time, a faint red light exploded from his eyes. This low-grade sacred saber is called Blood Devour. As its rightful owner, I shall not feel any pain until I fall in battle. It shall give me endless strength and courage. Limitless. The once calm face that Boris was carrying had now turned into a look of madness. Sacred weapons were unique and had each of their own characteristics. As a standard weapon of the Dragon Abyss Palace, Zen's sword was almost useless. However, he was the kind of guy who made use of whatever he had. A weapon was a weapon. All of them shall give their owners the strength and courage. Fighting a 10th level war fighter is actually very embarrassing for someone like me. However, since you have obtained the title of Celestial Position, I cannot regard you as a war fighter. Now, show me your true strength. Flourishing his saber, Boris took a leap while a violent forceful energy erupted out of his body. His weapon released a blinding light, which went directly onto Zen's head. Quick to notice this potential damage, Zen leaned to the side and avoided the strike. Naturally, the saber only cut through the air. A loud thud was heard by the entire place. The broad blade of the saber decorated the arena. Boris horizontally pulled out his saber and it drew a semicircle in the air. He attempted to hack it towards Zen's direction. Even though Boris was smaller compared to the other ogres, he was just as strapping and strong. Stepping aside, Zen had once again managed to avoid the forceful attack. Two huge cracks appeared on the arena grounds. Like the mouths of devils, they healed themselves. Because of the existence of the weapon spirit, the Tower of Sin had such an ability to heal itself. Zen understood that now. The weapon spirit controlled the Tower of Sin. Now that its owner had already passed away, the weapon spirit could only protect the tower, but not had the trainees there under its control. Is that all you know how to do? Dodge my attacks. Let's see if you can still dodge this. Boris waved his saber and began to spin it rapidly, almost resembling a windmill. By the time Boris had reached a certain speed, Zen could no longer see the saber in front of him. It was just a circular wheel. This is the broken killing wheel. Boris stared at his gigantic creation and charged towards Zen. The saber's rotation speed had reached its limit, completely sealing off Zen's escape route. It was going to be impossible for him to avoid this one. It's time, Zen whispered to himself as he horizontally held his sword. Taking a step back, he let his strongest energy emerge from his body. No move, he looked like a child with his crooked sword, almost as if stabbing the opponent for no clear reason at all. What is he doing? Is he making fun of Boris? He is definitely going to pay for mocking his opponent. What kind of technique was that? Zen's actions had caused a commotion among the crowd. All of them had not a clue as to what that crooked sword technique was for. Obviously, Boris was the dominator of the two. Whoever got strangled into the wheel would suffer a painful death, with their body pieces spreading out in the arena. That meat grinder of a saber could create a bloodbath. In the eyes of the war generals, Zen's strike was quite unorthodox and completely out of tune. Cheryl stood up from her seat and stared intensely at Zen's crooked weapon. As a swordsman herself, Cheryl was shocked at the sight of the young man's sword. Her swordsmanship was passed down to her from the sacred place of Demon Knight, so it was safe to say that she knew her weapons. This sword technique is the strangest I've seen, yet I'm very drawn to it. Cheryl admitted to herself, even if she didn't want to. Malcolm, Madeline, Fabian, and Jared, who were all sitting right by Cheryl, had a particular look on their faces. They were frustrated and impressed. Putting aside racial prejudice, Zen's crooked sword technique seemed to contain endless mysteries being discussed by everyone present at the scene. They all believed they could easily avoid this attack and defeat him using other methods. This move made by Zen caused utter confusion. Where could this brat have learned this kind of technique? Fabian's lips twisted in different directions as he shook his head, unable to make anything out of Zen's sudden weirdness. I think it's just getting more and more interesting, to be honest, Madeline said, smiling softly. Clatter. Zen's sword move seemed light, but as he began to thrust it forward, it touched the shaft of Boris' saber. At that exact moment, a huge force exploded from Zen's body, spreading throughout the sword. With a single strike, the saber that Boris brandished like a wheel came to an abrupt stop. A faint smile hung on Zen's face as he looked at Boris. His long sword was firmly stuck on Boris' saber as if it grew out of it. He tried to withdraw his weapon, but Zen's sword was too big for him to do so. Strength had always been the pride of the ogres. The Demon Knight relied on their agility, while the ogres basked in their pride of strength. Boris, an ogre, was defeated strength-wise by a boy. That was the ultimate humiliation. With his face turning red from the embarrassment, Boris, with all his might, mustered all of his ogre strength and was finally able to take back his saber. With a swift wave of his hand, the saber created a huge arc as it flew to Zen's direction. Despite that forceful attack, Zen remained unaffected. Using the no-move technique, he was able to dodge Boris' attacks. Zen's technique was intangible, so his sword strikes were unpredictable and seamless. He moved like the wind. Clatter. Once again, Zen's sacred weapon had sealed off Boris' saber. I did it again, Zen beamed to himself. Upon seeing the boy's smiling face, Boris started to grow sad and felt somehow defeated. Among the war generals, Boris only had one opponent, and that was Cheryl from the Demon Knight. He even had the confidence to kill warlords of low levels. But today, he was being made fun of. Not even a war general but a mere human war fighter, Zen was able to put Boris to shame. This was a huge blow even for a big ogre like him to take. Anyone who dares mock me will face his death. A red light appeared on Boris' eyes. His weapon, the Blood Devourer, had a special martial skill, and that was to swallow its owner's blood vitality and give off powerful strength. The power of the ogre's blood vitality was far greater than that of ordinary creatures. But, the loss of blood vitality would ultimately have a negative impact on a martial artist. Thus, even Boris rarely used his blood vitality to nourish his saber, as it could cost him much. He had no other choice at that point. That brat of a human right in front of him had to die. He had to disappear, for the sake of himself as well as the ogres. When the raging energy from his body had fully entered the saber in his hand, the aura that burst out from him was 10 times stronger than before. He was just getting started. Chapter 587, A Severe Blow. At this moment, Boris looked like a wild beast from ancient times. Any warrior who could enter the 10th floor of the Tower of Sin would at least be a 10th level war general. But regardless of their rank, their heart would start pounding if they were surrounded by Boris's powerful aura. Boris is really strong. Even a warlord on the 11th floor might not have such an imposing aura. Of course, Boris is known as the unbeatable war general, so he must be very strong. In my opinion, Zen is still the most marvelous talent. Although he's only a 10th level war fighter, he's able to suppress Boris. If a warrior who has just reached the warlord realm isn't a match for Boris, doesn't that mean that Zen can defeat a small portion of the warlords by taking advantage of his cultivation base? When Boris's aura and power suddenly burst out of him, the forceful energy within his body also erupted. He stomped his feet on the arena and 2 sunken footprints appeared on the floor. What great speed! Zen's gaze flickered as the long sword in his hand hovered lightly, instinctively blocking him from harm. Zen's sacred longsword was small with a blade as wide as only 3 fingers while Boris's broad-bladed saber was incomparably large. When Boris saw that Zen was trying to use a sword to block his saber, a vicious grin appeared on his face. As he charged toward Zen, he swung his saber and brought it down to Zen's head with the momentum of thunder. Thunder hacking. Boris wasn't concerned about whether Zen was trying to block his attack with a long sword or a mountain on his back. No matter what it was, Boris could chop it all into pieces with one slash. The forceful energy surged out of Boris's body. On the back of his saber, countless streaks of scarlet lightning appeared. This was the blade intent that Boris had learned, and it also contained the special power of thunder and lightning. There were many similarities between Boris's blade intent and Rocher's extreme thunder sword intent. Why doesn't Zen dodge? He's even choosing to take the blow head-on. It's too dangerous for him to let his sword collide with Boris's large saber since his sword doesn't have an advantage in the first place. Moreover, Boris's saber is huge, so he might even chop it down. Everyone's face was filled with confusion as various thoughts went through their minds. He's too confident. Olivia couldn't help but shout out at this moment. Zen had other methods to resist Boris's attack, but he chose to face it head-on. Apart from his incomparable confidence, Olivia couldn't think of any other reasonable explanation for his actions. Power of Dragon Scales. Activate. The dragon scales in Zen's mind lit up bit by bit, emitting jade green light. As the heavy power continued to fill Zen's body, an extremely confident smile appeared on his face. He had quite a few methods to resist Boris's move. But at this moment, he also understood that Boris wouldn't stop attacking him until he was dead. The ogre warlords below the arena definitely wouldn't let him off either. Since the talent test had already set off waves in the Tower of Sin, Zen wanted to make the waves more violent, suppressing the ogre's aggressiveness and arrogance. And the prelude to suppressing Boris was his sword strike. Clang! Zen's long sword finally collided with Boris's saber. In everyone's eyes, this was a peerlessly powerful saber strike. It was obvious that Boris had channeled all of his power for this strike. It was also the most powerful strike that Boris had ever performed. Even warlords from the upper floors wouldn't dare to face this strike head-on. Zen, however, stood rooted to the spot without any resistance, holding his sword in front of his body and swinging it ever so slightly to defend himself. But even though his sword barely moved, it stood firmly in front of Zen like an iron lock and successfully blocked Boris's strike. The entire scene was strange and shocking. Generally speaking, the warrior who attacked first had a great advantage in power because of his sprint. So, if the warrior's opponent could block his attack without even moving, it meant that the opponent's strength was much greater than his. But Zen was just a human while Boris was an ogre. How could Zen block Boris's strike in this situation? In terms of talent, the ogre's strength was far greater than that of humans. On top of that, Boris's main focus was on body refinement. Although his body was much smaller than that of ordinary ogres, the explosive power stored within him was very powerful and impressive. Anyone who fought with him could figure that out. That was why the situation they were in now was all the more inexplicable. It was as if Zen could easily block Boris's terrible attack with a single, gentle sword strike. Standing in front of Boris, Zen looked like an insurmountable wall that couldn't be moved at all. The difference in their strengths was obvious at this moment. Boris and all the other creatures on the 10th floor were shocked. Malcolm was stunned as well. Just now, seeing Zen play around with Boris while battling him, Malcolm had been determined to kill Zen. Now, Malcolm was even more sure that he had to get rid of this guy as soon as possible. If he let him continue cultivating in the tower, it wouldn't be long before Zen would rise to prominence. By then, the ogres wouldn't have so much as a foothold in the Tower of Sin. With that thought, Malcolm decided to rush into the arena. It was obvious that Boris was no match for Zen, so not only did Malcolm want to kill Zen, but he also wanted to save Boris. Although Boris couldn't defeat Zen, he was still the most important talent of the two sacred places in the ogre. In the future, Boris would definitely obtain a seat at the top of the tower. So, Malcolm could never allow Zen to kill Boris. Boris slowly moved his saber away from Zen's long sword. Although he maintained a calm expression, he felt his hand holding the saber become powerless and weak. Realizing the difference between him and Zen had been a big blow to him. The disappointment made him feel as if a monster had risen up in his heart to torment him. That monster roared continuously at him, telling him how big the gap was between him and Zen. "I've lost," he thought. The reason why he had conceded so straightforwardly was not because he didn't have the spirit to fight. In fact, Boris's warrior spirit was extremely tenacious. But this time, the failure of his saber strike had exhausted all of his confidence. After 10 years of preparing for cultivation and succeeding in it, he had helplessly discovered that he couldn't defeat a mere young man. This was the only thought that was going through his mind. All the pride and confidence that he had been holding all these years had vanished into nothingness after this single saber strike. He had always been regarded as the strongest amongst the war generals and the most outstanding talent of the two sacred places of the ogre, but after his failed saber strike, he felt that all of these high praises had become laughable. Zen withdrew his sword, gripping the sword hilt. Then, he cupped his hands and looked at Boris. "Thank you for letting me win." In the arena, the winner could kill the loser, but Zen didn't kill Boris. It wasn't because he feared the ogre. He had blocked Boris's attack to fully display his strength and talent and improve his prestige. Since he had achieved his goal, he didn't feel the need to kill Boris. He wanted to make the other races understand that the human race wasn't weak. Another reason Zen didn't take Boris's life was because Boris was the only ogre that he admired. Moreover, even if he killed Boris, it wouldn't mean much. Swoosh! A thick ray of lucky light shot out of Boris's chest and settled into the token on Zen's. It was just as Zen had estimated. He had obtained a considerable amount of lucky light on the 10th floor. This was one of the reasons why he had wanted to climb to the 10th floor as quickly as possible. On this floor, he could accumulate lucky light faster. Boris walked down the arena unhappily, carrying his saber. He looked like a walking corpse as he staggered along. Even though his warrior spirit was extremely tough, after the severe blow he had just faced, his spirit had been almost destroyed by Zen. Now, he'd have to cultivate more and gain some insights. If he could achieve enlightenment during his cultivation, then his strength would greatly increase. He would become more powerful and frightening than he was now. However, if he couldn't gain enough insights or enhance his cultivation base, he might not be able to make any great achievement in martial arts in his whole life. "Zen, since our war general couldn't defeat you, let me personally fight against you. Would you like to accept my challenge?" Malcolm jumped off the spectator stand, ready to step into the arena. His words surprised everyone in the area. Their expressions changed all of a sudden. According to the rules of the Tower of Sin, the warriors in the upper floors could enter the lower floors, but they weren't allowed to go into the arenas of the lower floors to battle with others. This rule was to maintain the balance in the Tower of Sin. If one couldn't defeat his opponents on the floor he was in and went to challenge others on the lower floors to accumulate lucky light, the tower would be in a mess. Anyone would be able to accumulate lucky light this way. It was impossible for Malcolm to not know about the rules. Since he was still choosing to come out and challenge Zen, it could only be said that he was being shameless. Chapter 588. A fight using the space law. A seat owner had just challenged a war fighter. It was the kind of thing that probably had never ever happened before in the Tower of Sin. The seat owners were all 10th level warlords, and one might even call them peak level warlords. They were only one step away from becoming war sages, while Zen, who was a 10th level war fighter, was 2 whole realms away from even becoming a peak level warlord, let alone a war sage. Even though his potential was high and he was extremely powerful indeed, he still wouldn't be a match for Malcolm. According to the rules of the Tower of Sin, martial artists on the upper floors weren't allowed to fight with those on the lower floors. Malcolm had personally broken this rule now. The consequences of this action were too troublesome to imagine, which was the reason why the expressions of so many martial artists suddenly changed. If a seat owner from the ogres took lead and broke this rule, then the martial artists of the other races would ignore this rule and descend on lower floors too. If that happened, the Tower of Sin would fall into endless chaos again. No race wanted this to happen. Maybe that was the reason why, but in any case, just as Malcolm was about to enter the arena, an ethereal voice suddenly called out, "You're an ogre warlord, but you challenge a martial artist on the 10th floor. It's against the rules, isn't it?" Everyone looked towards the direction of the voice and saw Cheryl, who was dressed in green. Boris and Cheryl were the strongest warriors on the 10th floor. But why did Cheryl call Malcolm out like that? Didn't she know that Malcolm was intentionally breaking the rule in order to kill Zen? Or did the Demon Knight want to maintain the order in the Tower of Sin? It wasn't impossible when one thought about it. After all, the Demon Knight enjoyed enormous benefits in the Tower of Sin, and the seats they owned were second only to the ogres, in number. Only the Demon Knight had the strength to confront the ogres. However, many creatures had heard the words of the Demon Knight's seat owner, Madeline, earlier on, and from her expressions, it seemed that the Demon Knight did not want to interfere in this matter. Now, Madeline was sitting by unconcerned, but Cheryl, a junior, had come forwards to speak. Why? When Malcolm was about to walk towards the arena, the expressions of Olivia, Fabian and Jared had also changed drastically. Fabian was hesitant about whether or not he should stop Malcolm. Once Malcolm made a move, it was very likely that the fight would evolve into a war between the humans and the ogres. The Purple Heart's sacred place was definitely not a match for the Flaming Ogre's sacred place and the Dread Ogre's sacred place, and there was a huge disparity between the power of the humans with 4 seats and the ogres with more than 20 seats in the Tower of Sin. Malcolm's large eyes turned as he sneered, "I know what I'm doing. A junior like you is unqualified to remind me. Where is Madeline?" Malcolm could not figure out what Madeline was thinking. She had not uttered a single word, but had allowed a junior of the Demon Knight, Cheryl, to come out and confront him. Why? The attitude of the Demon Knight was extremely important. Therefore, Malcolm had to shift the topic of the conversation towards Madeline. He wanted to confirm whether the Demon Knight was interfering or not. Cheryl was reprimanded by Malcolm, but her face remained calm. Hearing her name mentioned, Madeline finally stood up and remarked in a soft voice, "The rules of the Tower of Sin were jointly set by us. I think that Cheryl is the only one qualified to challenge Zen. After their fight, you're free to do everything you want." The subtext of Madeline's words was very clear. The Demon Knight didn't want to have a hand in the ogres breaking the rule. They were only concerned about Cheryl's fight with Zen, and as to what Malcolm would do after the fight, they didn't care at all. Actually, Madeline had said at the very beginning that she didn't want to interfere in this matter. She hadn't changed her mind now, but when Cheryl had seen the fight between Zen and Boris, she was eager to give it a try and challenge Zen. As an elder of the Demon Knight, Madeline had agreed to Cheryl's request, which was the reason why she had stepped forward to stop Malcolm. Hearing Madeline's words, Malcolm coldly laughed. "Very well, I will take my time then." With that said, he stood with his hands behind his back to the side. In any case, from Malcolm's point of view, Zen was bound to die and would not be able to survive today's calamity no matter what happened. As long as the Demon Knight did not intervene, everything was going to be under Malcolm's control. As to those human seat owners, the ogres could kill them easily if they wanted to. Cheryl smiled faintly and said, "Thank you, Warlord." After she finished speaking, her figure flashed, leaving a green light in the air. It was as if she had penetrated through space and entered the arena. Cheryl cultivates both her body and her life vitality. Her space law is becoming more and more proficient now. It seems like she has mastered the second layer. She really has very strong perception. It's said that she is only 20 years old. But she has already grasped the second layer of the space law at such a young age. In the history of the Tower of Sin, there hasn't been a war general that has mastered the second layer of the space law. Can she defeat Zen? Creatures from many different races watched with excitement, while humans watched with worry. Olivia and the rest had seen a glimmer of hope when the Demon Knight had suddenly joined in on the debate. They could only place their hopes on the Demon Knight, but they never expected that the Demon Knight had no intentions of interfering at all. It was merely Cheryl's own idea to challenge Zen. This showed that the humans were already weak to quite a large extent. They were just like fish on a chopping board, and the other races could cut them in whatever ways they wanted to. This was the tragedy of the week. Since Cheryl's challenge had temporarily delayed Malcolm's move, what was next? Her strength was not the least bit weaker than Boris. Moreover, she cultivated her body and life vitality, so it was impossible to guard against her attacks. Even if Zen defeated Cheryl, he still had to fight with Malcolm. In a word, Zen was at a dead end now. Olivia and the others had worry written all over their faces. They were unable to find a way to resolve this situation. All they could do was to pray that Zen could, somehow, create a miracle. However, no matter how high Zen's talent was, he was still only a 10th level war fighter. He didn't even have the ability to fight against a 10th level warlord. Olivia let out a faint sigh as she looked at the heroic and imposing young man standing on the arena. A deep sense of helplessness enveloped her since she didn't know what to do. If anyone else came to know that there was a 10th level warlord who was eyeing him or her with hostility, he or she wouldn't be in a mood to duel. However, there was still a faint smile on Zen's face, as if he didn't take the killing intent before him to heart. Many people felt that Zen was just trying to remain calm, but in this situation, he needed some confidence. The question was, how was he so confident? Many creatures kept guessing but still couldn't figure out why. Cheryl walked gracefully into the arena, and a slender sword appeared in her hand. She then spoke in a light and gentle voice, "Zen, I want to challenge you." With a slight movement of his long sword, Zen nodded. "You have the strength to defeat Boris, but you may not be my match." Cheryl continued softly. "Since we're already on the arena, there's no need to speak so much," Zen replied indifferently to this powerful talent of the Demon Knight. "You are very proud. I hope you can maintain your pride." After Cheryl finished speaking, her figure flashed and she took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, she had crossed a distance of 60 to 70 feet and was now standing beside Zen. Then she brandished her sword and pointed it straight at Zen's eyebrows. "The space law." Zen smiled faintly. His body also flickered as he took a step forward and traveled through space. Cheryl's sword seemed to have hit Zen, but in reality, Zen had already left where he was standing and had now appeared behind Cheryl. He also slashed down at Cheryl in the same way. Both of them are using space law. Isn't Zen a body refiner? It turns out that he also cultivates the life vitality. Just how many cards does this brat have in his hand? In a situation where both sides had grasped the space law, it was often difficult to determine the victor in a battle. With the space law, one could freely travel about, so it was extremely difficult to completely block off the opponent's escape route. Also, because of this suspense, the battle situation would become more and more intense, and the tempo would also become very high. Zen traveled through space and appeared behind Cheryl, who in the blink of an eye, also traveled through space and appeared on the side of Zen. However, when Cheryl thrust out her sword, Zen had traveled through space and left. Figures began to appear and disappear alternatively, leaving the audience dazzled. Although the two were dressed differently, they moved so fast that some martial artists weren't able to distinguish them. Clang, 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 clang. While traveling through space, Zen finally caught onto a gap, and the two swords immediately clashed 7 or 8 times. In terms of pure sword techniques, Cheryl was at a disadvantage. Although she had watched the battle between Zen and Boris, and witnessed Zen's no-move technique, she still couldn't resist him because his moves were invisible. Chapter 589, Queen. Although sword moves were ever-changing, the fact still stood that there were certain rules to be followed in the end. No matter how exquisite the swordsmanship of someone might appear to be, it would always be based on changes in other swordsmanship. Nevertheless, there were always regulations that they would adhere to. In those moments wherein Cheryl fought against other swordsmen, she found it relatively easy to predict and anticipate their next move just by observing the tension of their wrists. However, she was at a loss right now due to the fact that Zen's swordsmanship seemed to follow no rules, as she could not simply foresee his next move. After they exchanged a few blows, it was not long after that Zen effortlessly broke through Cheryl's defense and aimed his glistening long sword at her chest. Eventually, she sighed as she had no choice but to pass through space to escape being maimed by the sharp edge of his sword. In the beginning, Cheryl had actually expected to be unsuccessful in breaking through Zen's defensive swordsmanship. Upon grabbing the opportunity to observe the battle between him and Boris, she accepted the realization that she would be unable to penetrate Zen's extremely strange swordsmanship. On the other hand, just because she was incapable of breaking through did not mean she was not confident enough to defeat him. This was because a battle between warriors did not solely rely on swordsmanship as the only factor to determine the results. Most of the time, it would depend on the skillful individual who managed to bring a trump card into the fight. As soon as she finished traveling through space to increase the distance between her and Zen, she smirked as she planned her next move. The woman's bright eyes flashed momentarily before she parted her red lips to shout, 3-element shadows. Swish, swish, swish. In the blink of an eye, 3 daunting shadows rushed out from her body and proceeded to stand in 3 corners of the arena. Turning his head to scan his eyes at the length of the 3 shadows that suddenly appeared, Zen frowned slightly and briefly lowered his arms in hesitation. Different thoughts ran through his mind as he was not certain about what the woman intended to do. At the exact moment Cheryl projected the 3 shadows into the field, she immediately leapt high into the air, moving towards Zen's direction with malice. She grasped her sword with both hands while holding it upside down. The wind whooshed as she stabbed her blade right on top of Zen's head. Frost-breaking sword, she yelled with vigor. An incomparably sharp sword light pierced right through Zen's skull. Unexpectedly, it seemed as if it dawned on her that she had made a terrible mistake as Zen merely laughed coldly at her attempt and he flicked the sword in his hand once again. This time, he made sure not to miss as he managed to shatter Cheryl's sword light as well as slash a deep gash on her shoulder. Luckily for her, she was able to dodge in the nick of time. Her body would have been cut by his sword otherwise. As quick as she had attacked, her body also instantly changed direction while she was in the air. It was as if a strange magnetizing force had appeared out of nowhere and forcefully pulled her away from the man. Instantly, Cheryl then fused with the dark shadow located in the corner of the arena. The moment Cheryl merged her figure with the shadow that lurked in the corner, another shadow emerged from her body and instantaneously spread to another corner. Upon finishing her move with the 3 silhouettes remaining in the arena, she looked at Zen with confidence as a grin adorned her face. "Well, these shadows do look like they have some use," Zen muttered, glancing at the darkness that spread over the corners of the arena. If Cheryl combined her attacks with these shadows right then and there, she would have a contingency plan of fusing with a shadow the moment her attacks did not work on him. At this situation, she would be invincible even though she would not be able to strike him effectively. "I want to see how you will break through my 3-element shadows." With a sneer, Cheryl chuckled as her form flickered again, prepared to move. This time, however, she did not jump to confront him but instead lowered her body before rushing towards Zen. Clang! Upon discerning her attack, Zen instantly shifted his sword to sweepingly chop the floor as he intended to charge at his front. Seeing the blade coming at her, Cheryl easily traversed through space once again and avoided the brunt of the attack. The long sword gripped tightly in her hand was already pressed against the skin of his neck, ready to slice and pull him apart. In a flash, his figure morphed into a shadow and he suddenly materialized behind her. Currently, Zen did not have enough time to swing his sword before Cheryl's body was about to fuse with another one of the shadows. Having had enough of the illusion, Zen did not intend to give Cheryl any more chances. When she was ready to merge herself with one of the shadows, he had only pretended to attack when in reality, he had already taken a step forward to stand guard beside the shadow. However, Zen was rendered speechless when Cheryl's figure changed direction midway of fusing and subsequently landed on another shadow instead. Dumbfounded, Zen blinked his eyes warily and paused. "This." The man turned his head to look at Cheryl, who appeared to be full of smiles as she grinned cheekily at the obvious display of disorientation painted across Zen's features. Truthfully, he had definitely not expected that fighting Cheryl would be this troublesome. Needless to say, every race had its own specialties when it came to skills. Just as the humans of the Purple Heart Sacred Place excelled in the life vitality system, and the ogres stood out in body refinement, the members of the Demon Knight were also considered relatively special. This nearly flawless race seemed to allow the freedom to choose their own cultivation system. Furthermore, the cultivation method passed down in their sacred place was somehow strange. "From now on, we can only compare our speeds." Just as another infuriating smile appeared on her face, Zen did not hesitate any longer and stepped forward, once again rushing to attack her. Unfortunately, the staggering slash he aimed at her had no effect whatsoever. Before Cheryl merged with a shadow and disappeared, her hand managed to thrust the sword towards him. Employing his quick reflexes, Zen dodged the abrupt movement of her sword and accelerated in the direction of the next shadow straight away. At the same time, a white light gleamed in his hand before the unbreakable broken flying knife became visible. The flying knife was aimed directly at another shadow before he threw it with power. As he used his flying knife to attack a shadow while simultaneously dealing with the shadow in front of him, there was only one shadow in the arena left unattended. Halfway through his offensive charge, he then abruptly threw the sword in his hand at the last shadow. Swoosh! Now, all the 3 shadows in the arena were under attack. No matter which one Cheryl chose to merge with, she would be injured. At this situation, Cheryl was slightly flustered to do her next move. It was true that once she activated the three-element shadows, she would be able to freely choose and utilize any of the shadows to merge with. However, it also limited the direction in which she could move to at the same time. It did not matter now which shadow she descended on because she would be instantly attacked by Zen. Now what? She thought to herself. In the perspective of Cheryl, this was indeed a difficult decision to ponder upon, given the limitations of her attack. Eventually, her silhouette flickered in a moment of desperation as she finally chose the location where Zen was as her next destination. Although Cheryl was not definite about her knowledge on the power of Zen's flying knife thus far, she could tell with a glance that even though it was broken, its aura was extremely sharp and something that could not be underestimated. Contemplating by herself, she understood that if she had chosen another shadow, she would probably be pierced through by Zen's sword. Furthermore, it was a sacred weapon and there was absolutely no way she would have been able to block it. With the limited options she had, she could have only selected the shadow Zen was dealing with at the moment. Since he had removed the sword in his hand by throwing it at the shadow, she seriously expected that his strength would be greatly reduced. This was due to the fact that Cheryl believed in the notion that swordsmen relied on their swords the most. If it ever happened that a swordsman willingly threw his sword out in a battle, then it meant that the man was ultimately prepared to gamble everything he had. Zen having no sword in his hand meant that she would then have a huge chance of defeating him. It was a common conception that a swordsman without a sword was like a tiger with its teeth pulled out. Unbeknownst to Cheryl, she would be in for a surprise when she eventually found out that Zen was even more terrifying when he did not have his sword. Upon the very moment Cheryl descended, she poised herself to face Zen's fist directly. In the meantime, Zen had not bothered to activate the stellar body because he did not feel the need to use it to deal with the woman. Split the light. Even though Zen had already launched his punch, Cheryl did not hesitate to counterattack with a move of her own. Her long sword uncoiled and gleamed like a nimble green snake which released a faint azure light, aiming straight at him. Although her sword moves did not appear to be powerful enough, every flick of her wrist was definitely exquisite. In addition to this, each of them was able to point at a vital point of Zen's body. If Zen were to use his fist to attack her, he would not be fast enough to land the first hit and she could then chop half his head off. Conversely, Zen's fist did not swing towards Cheryl. Instead, he did the unexpected as his hand changed its direction midway and directly grabbed onto her sword. In reality, Cheryl's sword was also a sacred weapon, which was known as gentle snow. Besides possessing the strength of a sacred weapon, it was also abnormally light to the point that it felt relatively weightless. It must have been named after its weight, as grabbing it felt like handling snow in Zen's perspective. After Zen gripped the blade of her sword between his two fingers, Cheryl frowned as she strained to pull it out of his grip. It was similar to being embedded into a crack in a compact stone, as she falteringly discovered that she was unable to wrench it out at all. Despite the fact that Cheryl was a woman and the members of the Demon Knight did not specialize in raw strength, the power of Cheryl, who was a warrior that cultivated both her body and life vitality, was certainly not something ordinary warriors could match. Even if her sword was suppressed by a mountain, she could still be able to pull it out. However, Cheryl had tried her best to tug at it twice in succession, even erupting with the forceful energy within her body to no avail. No matter how much she gritted her teeth and the amount of effort made sweat pool on her forehead, the sword in her hand did not budge even a single inch. Noticing her struggle and frustration, Zen merely gave her a lazy grin before squeezing the blade tighter with his fingers. Clang! Without much effort from Zen, he broke the sword between his fingers and watched mirthlessly as the mangled pieces resounded upon hitting the floor unceremoniously. Seething with indignation and anger, she glared at the man coldly before shrieking, "You!" The woman found herself no longer maintaining her calm disposition as she wanted to lash out instead. Even though she was a talent of the Sacred Palace, being able to acquire a powerful sacred weapon was not that easy. Furthermore, the gentle snow was the most suitable for her the moment she started practicing her swordsmanship with it. Due to this, she was indeed very fond of the weapon and took good care of it. With shock adorning her features, she had definitely not expected her sword to be broken by Zen. The strength of a sacred weapon was not something an ordinary weapon could be compared to given its outstanding power. It just so happened that Cheryl's sword was too thin and narrow. If he had done the same move on Boris' saber, it would have been more difficult for Zen to destroy it even if he had activated all of his dragon scales. Fortunately, with Zen's current prowess, it was not too challenging or difficult for him to break Cheryl's sword apart. "What?" Grinning slyly, Zen asked the irate woman with an innocent expression. I am going to kill you. Glaring at the nonchalant Zen, Cheryl was furious and a green light suddenly appeared right above her head. As soon as the green light had appeared, it directly inserted itself into her skull. With a start, he wiped the smile off his face and stared at her with seriousness because he immediately sensed extreme danger about to happen. Considering Zen's current strength, ordinary war generals would not be able to make him feel this way. Even ordinary warlords never gave him a reason to perceive them as threats. When this intense feeling of danger came over him, Zen abruptly retreated and created a reasonable distance between him and Cheryl. The woman's fingers suddenly emitted a few rays of pitch-black light as her nails seemingly extended. In honesty, Zen was concerned at the sight of the black light and it made him breathe unevenly. No matter how confident Zen was in his fairy weapon-like body, he certainly knew better than to let this woman scratch him with her dangerous-looking fingernails. At any rate, Cheryl obviously did not plan on letting him go that easily. As she fiercely rushed towards him, she vigorously waved her sharp claws. The scene discernibly looked like a howling lynx facing its prey in the wild. Under the continuous pursuit of the outraged lady, the black claws almost scraped Zen several times, but he was still able to dodge them in time. In the middle of scraping through and managing to avoid Cheryl's frontal attack by mere inches, Zen forgot that her shadows were still in the arena. The instant Zen retreated to another corner of the arena, Cheryl's figure instantly disappeared and materialized in the shadow behind him, about to attack him by surprise. Garbage. He knew that the minute he was grazed by this woman, it would be a detrimental blow to him. Even if he did not die, he would be seriously injured from the brunt of her attack. Cursing at himself, he realized just then that he had been too careless this time around. In another moment of despondency, the sword spirit within Zen's body suddenly emerged from him. Together with Lily, the black sword that was previously stored in his space ring appeared. As soon as Lily's faint figure flickered to life, her hand immediately shot out and held the hilt of the wicked black sword. Pulling the black sword out of Zen's space ring, she pointed it to the other woman's direction before slashing it directly as a shield from the black light. Crack! Surprisingly, Cheryl did not dodge the sword at all. Even though she had seen the gigantic sword appear in front of her, she gave it no attention and did not give up on her attack. With a resolute mind, she confidently thought that nothing could have stopped the black light on her fingers. Before they knew it, 5 deep gashes suddenly appeared on the surface of the black sword. Looking up to the end of the blade, Cheryl momentarily saw Lily's appearance from behind the sword when she slashed the weapon towards her. What? With her mouth agape, Cheryl blinked briefly in surprise at what had just happened. To everyone's disbelief, the sword in Lily's possession stopped right beside Cheryl's neck and did not finish what it had intended to do. As the crowd witnessed the astonishing scene right in front of their very eyes, they all sported the same looks of shock and confusion. What exactly was going on in the arena? All of them at that moment had wondered the same thing. Why did such a scene appear just as the battle was getting more and more intense? Zen shook his head and heaved a sigh of relief at the perfect timing of Lily's arrival. In reality, he still had a few tricks up his sleeve, secret skills that he could utilize in order to defeat Cheryl. However, he was not willing to use them if he was not in a life-or-death situation. Never would he have imagined that the same girl who had looked so gentle before would be someone so ferocious when provoked. It was also unexpected that Cheryl, at that last few seconds, appeared to not care about her own life and was instead demon-bent on just reaching him with her claws. With his heart hammering beneath his ribcage, Zen realized that there was a problem, a deeply troubling yet strange problem. Why did my sword spirit suddenly become unruly? He thought to himself, puzzled at the behavior Lily manifested just now. The sword spirit had always been unfalteringly obedient to Zen's orders up until that moment. If he sought her out and commanded her to fight, she would incessantly chase after his opponent. Moreover, if he needed her to defend him, then she would unquestionably be there to protect him with whatever it took. Assessing the desperate situation that just occurred seconds ago, Zen did ask Lily to block Cheryl's attack, but when she appeared, she actually stopped the momentum of the sword in her hand when she swung it at Cheryl. Biting his lower lip unconsciously, he contemplated by himself once again, what is going on? This was something that had never happened before. Why did they suddenly stop fighting? One of the spectators asked out loud, confused at the sudden halt of movements from the warriors in the arena. Upon noticing the arrival of a new being in the arena, someone in the crowd exclaimed, "Look! Another woman is right there with them. Is she also from the Demon Knight? I felt the aura of a sword spirit from that woman. That should be Zen's sword spirit." A man from the audience responded. Let's not talk about the sword spirit first. Who can tell me why Cheryl has suddenly stopped moving? As the crowd continued to discuss among themselves, Cheryl stared unblinking at Zen's sword spirit before softly uttering a single word in reverence, Queen. Right after she spoke, she immediately knelt down in front of Lily, bowing her head in respect at the other woman. There were still many members of the Demon Knight in the audience. It was as if Cheryl was the source of the domino effect that made the others follow her lead. Within the span of mere seconds, they also stood up and knelt in veneration towards the center of the arena. Even one of the seat owners, Madeline, also knelt on one knee to give her salutations as she faced the arena with a look of piety. At the same time, a few other warlords that happened to be part of the Demon Knight from the other side of the arena walked over. Looking closer, they all noticed that the one leading the small group was surprisingly also a seat owner, Elder May. Upon glimpsing Zen's sword spirit, Elder May also knelt on one knee with the other warlords following her example and bowing as well towards the direction of the arena. After Phoebe astonishingly discovered the identity of Zen's sword spirit, she instantly sent a message to inform Elder May to report her arrival. This was possible due to the fact that she had been tracking her location for a while. Elder May had not been in the Tower of Sin or in the sacred place, but had been engaged in another mission. The minute the mission was completed, Elder May did not hesitate to rush towards the Tower of Sin immediately. The girl, Phoebe, had always been by Zen's side. Although she was a war general herself, she unfortunately did not have the authority to enter the 10th floor. Because of this, she could only wait in anticipation on the 9th floor. Now that Elder May had just arrived and had directly witnessed Zen summon the Queen of the Demon Knight, she naturally had to bow before her presence at this moment. What's going on? Someone asked conspicuously to the others beside him. What exactly is Zen's sword spirit? Shish, lower your voice a little. The one in front of the faceless person said, turning around to chastise the inquisitive boy. Don't get yourself into trouble. Look at the two seat owners of the Demon Knight. If you anger any of them, you will die for sure. But how did Zen get involved with the Demon Knight in the first place? He persisted, despite the warnings of the older man, although he merely glared at him and did not bother to answer his questions anymore. After the two of them saluted, Elder May and Madeline strode towards the center of the arena with purpose. Strictly speaking, even for warriors above the 11th floor, walking into the arena on the 10th floor was directly against the rules. However, in the perspective of these two seat owners, these so-called rules mattered little compared to the sudden presence of their queen. Simply put, those regulations were not something for them to worry about. Queen, is that you? Elder May walked in front of the sword spirit and asked in a trembling voice. Glancing between the excited and awed expressions of Elder May and Madeline, Zen pouted his lips and crossed his arms petulantly. Through Phoebe's guidance, Zen was already well aware that his sword spirit seemed to be related to some Queen of the Demon Knight. But of course, he ultimately knew that his sword spirit could not speak at all. He felt kind of bad for the members of the Demon Knight if they disappointingly found out that Lily could not speak after all their enthusiasm. Just as Zen was thinking this, the next scene caused his mouth to fall wide open and his eyes to become the size of saucers. It was unmistakable that he clearly heard his sword spirit say, "It is me." The frigid tone that the sword spirit had used distinctly revealed an unparalleled dignity. With just those three words coming out of her mouth, every creature that happened to hear her voice immediately felt insignificant and small in comparison. With their expressions visibly exuding wonderment, some of the other creatures could not help but also want to kneel in front of her. Once again, Madeline and Elder May dropped to one knee in the presence of the sword spirit without further ado. In the meantime, even Zen, Malcolm, and Fabian had to rely on their strong wills to restrain their urge to kneel down. Understandably, the most shocked individual out of all of them was Zen. This, he started to stammer. His heart seemed to want to jump out of his chest at the moment due to being overwhelmed. How and why did Lily suddenly speak? Sword spirits were indeed created when swordsmen constantly trained their sword intent, but it was relatively easier for Zen to get his sword spirit. What he had done to achieve this was he climbed up the mountain and kept on absorbing the sword spirits of other swordsmen. Logically speaking, even if he had absorbed and acquired numerous sword spirits back then, it should not have been so easy for his sword spirit to have a human figure. However, after having absorbed this woman's sword spirit, a strange thing had happened. His sword spirit had become how she looked as of now. Shaking his head vehemently at his thoughts, he was sure that no matter what she looked like, she was still his sword spirit. Furthermore, the sword spirit was not a living being, but it was supposed to act according to his own will. At this moment, however, the sword spirit had spoken and left Zen speechless and startled by the implications that dawned on him right then and there. It was no wonder why the sword spirit had brandished the black sword and stopped before slicing Cheryl's neck. She had her own rational thought processes, so she was naturally unwilling to kill her own clansman despite the order of Zen. In a flash, Lily turned around and stared indifferently into Zen's eyes, her frame emitting an endless aura of a queen. It was as if a person like her was simply born to be superior over others, and all life forms were born to pay their respects and kneel at her feet. You. Zen started to speak, his hesitation wanting to clamp his mouth shut, but he continued anyway. Who are you? As a matter of fact, no matter how big or intimidating the creatures that Zen encountered, he had never been as flustered as he was now, anxiously waiting for Lily's reply. Even when having faced the sole symbol of the owner of the Tower of Sin, Zen did not feel an ounce of nervousness. Amidst the confusion rampant in his mind, his own sword spirit opened her mouth to speak. Such a strange occurrence had caused Zen to be tongue-tied. Chapter 590. They are all going nuts. The origins of Lily had always been vague to Zen. He had his suspicions and little theories about her. Generally speaking, sword spirits could only act according to their master's orders, like puppets controlled by a puppeteer, where they could only carry out simple, mechanical commands. However, Lily herself possessed a sword dance technique that even Zen couldn't put his finger on. As a sword spirit, how could she know a martial skill that her master had never encountered? Even to the knowledgeable Cyan dragon, it was a mystery. Now, even more so for Zen. Connecting the dots, Zen now came to an understanding that perhaps, his own sword spirit had the soul of the demon Night Queen, which meant that she had her own consciousness. Attaching one's soul to the sword spirit wasn't that difficult. When Zen first entered the Killing Sword Mountain, he chanced by Iceni, who integrated a wisp of his soul into his sword spirit. According to Iceni, it didn't take him much to achieve such. This demon Night Queen somehow managed to sneak her soul into the sword spirit. However, Zen was unable to detect it, no matter how hard he tried. If he wasn't able to detect it himself, would the circumstances be the same for the Cyan dragon? Looking at his sword spirit, Zen barely got his words out of his mouth. He only wanted to know who she was. The curiosity was enough to keep him up most nights. My name isn't Lily, it's Lavender. That's what I'm called, the sword spirit answered, looking uninterested towards Zen. Lavender like the flower? Zen asked. Then reminded of two particular people in the first row of the talent tablet, he recalled their names. One was called Fire, and the other Cliff. He let out a low sigh, trying to piece some more pieces of the puzzle together. It was rare for humans to name themselves after nature. For this reason, Zen assumed that Fire and Cliff might have come from the demon Night race as well. Just like Lily or Lavender. However, in the upper world where there were countless races, there was no guarantee that those two people really came from the demon Night race. Although rare, it wasn't impossible for the other races to name themselves this way. Can you please explain to me how you became my sword spirit? At that moment, Zen had managed to control his mixed emotions. If anything, it was a relief to know that his sword spirit didn't show any animosity towards him. For the time being, I am unable to explain this to you. I hope you understand. For now, I'm going to need you to go to the Demon Knight's sacred place, Lavender told Zen, and then turned to Elder May and Madeline to ask, what's your sacred place called? What is its grade? Your Majesty, it's called the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. It is one of the most powerful sects on the Sea God continent and it's a 7th grade sacred place, Elder May respectfully replied. Their sacred place was the only 7th grade sect on the entire Sea God continent. Amber, along with her extraordinary talent, had made it all possible. If the two sacred places of the ogres were to be combined, they could possibly be a little stronger than the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place, and could also be considered as 7th grade. If separated, however, they were still only 6th grade, regardless if it were the Dread Ogre Sacred Place or the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place. It took a lot to achieve such grade. Meanwhile, the Purple Heart Sacred Place of the humans was of the top 5th grade because of their powers and resources. Since they had astounding warlords of the Soul Sea realm at the Tower of Sin, they might as well be considered as 6th grade, but that would make them the weakest on that grade. To achieve 7th grade in such a desolate land is quite impressive. Now, you lot will take me there, Lavender said calmly, with a hint of solemnity on her voice. The reason she invited Zen to the sacred place of the Demon Knight race was that she was his only sword spirit at that moment. They had yet to figure out what secret skill she used to hide inside Zen's sword, as both he and the Cyan Dragon were of no help in the matter. "It would be our pleasure to take you there, Your Majesty," Elder May and Madeline said at the same time. The members of the Demon Knight race believed their queen's existence to be of supreme importance. Lavender, if only it was in her nature, could order both Elder May and Madeline to kill themselves on the spot. She had such ability, but there was still more to explore and make sense of. The Demon Knight was considered to be an orderly race. They didn't have many taboos surrounding their race, and their construction and faith revolved around the 3 soul statues of their 3 queens. And it was a grave sin to disrespect their queens. "Wait," Malcolm's deep voice rang throughout the entire place, surprising everyone in sight. To him, everything was just confusing. Having allowed the divine-level talent, Cheryl, to challenge Zen, Malcolm believed that he had already shown ample respect for the Demon Knight. It was uncertain whether Cheryl could defeat Zen, so at the end of the day, it felt like it was still his responsibility to finish the boy. That was his ultimate truth. However, he was unable to make out what was unfolding right in front of him. Why exactly did Cheryl fall before Zen? How did this so-called Demon Knight Queen have the audacity to just claim Zen? It was unbelievable how Malcolm had allowed such things to occur. Upon landing her eyes on Malcolm's enormous figure, Lavender nonchalantly looked at him and asked, "What's the matter?" "I don't care who you are, and it's not the ogre's business to meddle with your plans. But I demand to leave that guy here. We have some unfinished business, in case you haven't noticed," Malcolm said harshly, pointing his finger at Zen. During that time, Malcolm had not a single clue with regards to the important part that Lavender played. Even if she was calm as the sea on a good day, Malcolm secretly felt inferior standing before her. However, that was a world where strength was the superior measurement of capacity, and Malcolm's would never lose to Lavender's. Killing Zen was his life's purpose, and he surely had no intention of allowing him to step out with Lavender unscathed. "How dare you? You're courting death." Just as Malcolm had finished his sentence, Madeline and Elder May began to charge towards him from both sides. Hearing the offensive words Malcolm had thrown to their queen, the 2 Demon Knight seat owners didn't hesitate to attack the ogre directly. It was to Malcolm's disadvantage, as combined powers from Madeline and Elder May were not to be trampled with. White petals emerged from Madeline's palms. Her pale and tender fingers possessed a frightening power that Malcolm was about to experience for himself. Simultaneously, a black dagger appeared from Elder May's hand, fiercely thrusting it into Malcolm's direction. "What do you think you're doing?" Malcolm's face twisted of anger. He clenched his fist as if packing up all of his rages in a punch. If he were to decide, Malcolm could have just killed Zen right then and there, but it was a matter of world war if he failed to control his urges. It was very likely that the Tower of Sin would be put in jeopardy if he let his anger get in the way of the order of things. Therefore, Malcolm moved with extreme caution. It was to his dismay that 2 of the seat owners from the Demon Knight race didn't even think twice and just attacked him. They had totally ignored the rules just because the ogre was talking smack. A fight between the seat owners, then. Seat owners were set to spar one another at the Tower of Sin once every year. The seat orders were arranged in accordance with the results of their performance in the fights. Among all of the 128 seat owners, there definitely was a difference in strength. But a spar was a spar. It was a part of the natural order, how things normally worked. If they continued fighting, other seat owners would begin to interfere. Hence, a war of the races. Even Malcolm himself didn't act harshly at that heated moment. He knew the dangers of meddling with the seat owners all too well. However, if his opponents would be weaklings from the human race, he wouldn't hesitate. Ogres always stood up for themselves. After all, that was what they were known for. Bam! Thud! Out of slight panic and confusion, Malcolm also let out some punches towards Madeline and Elder May in efforts of dodging their attacks. In a total of 128 seat owners, Malcolm was at the 45th place, and that said a lot about his strength. However, Madeline also took pride in her place, which was 42nd, and Elder May in 37th. It was not a joke, facing this too. Malcolm was certainly at a disadvantage because their attacks were in sync. One of Malcolm's punches managed to fend off Madeline's attacks. His other punch was able to push Elder May back a little, but she was still able to hit the ogre with her dagger. Malcolm was injured. A stream of thick, green, ogreish blood streamed down from his right shoulder. Covering his wound with his palm, Malcolm tried to put a stop to the bleeding. What he didn't know was that Elder May's dagger possessed a blade that had an ability to delay one's healing. The ogre failed to heal himself on time. Is this what I think it is? Has the demon knight race started a war against us ogres? Malcolm blurted, his face filled with disdain. He couldn't help but wonder how they got to that certain situation. Those two demon knight fellows were definitely out of their minds. How could they just attack him without thinking of the consequences? Lavender's origins had also preyed its way into Malcolm's head. Anyone who dares to humiliate my queen deserves nothing but death, Madeline said coldly. If we can easily wipe out two of your sacred places just to please our queen, how could you doubt our desires for a war against your kind? Elder May confidently added. Crazy. The members of the demon knight race are mad. They are all going nuts. Malcolm's mind was filled with nothing else but these thoughts. He found it difficult to wrap his head around the possible results of their carelessness. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have agreed to let Cheryl challenge Zen. Now, his chances of defeating the human had decreased. It was a pity that Malcolm was not a prophet. If he were, he could have seen such things coming. In fact, even Zen himself could not have predicted this, too. Whether or not Malcolm had agreed to allow Cheryl's request, the fight that was going on between him and those seat owners at that time would still be happening. It would not have changed a thing. But, as long as the fight in arena could last a little longer, Elder May should still have a shot in putting a stop to Malcolm's plan to kill him in due time. Chapter 591, 10 Top-Level Warlords. The arena had fallen into an eerie silence. No one dared to even breathe in fear of making a sound. They didn't need to speak anyway since their facial expressions were enough to convey their differing thoughts at what had just transpired in front of their very eyes. Everyone had thought Zen was dead meat the moment he set foot in the arena. Even some of the humans had the same thoughts, too. The human race had lamented and grieved over the fact that they couldn't protect a talent like Zen. They would have done all they could, but the threat of dragging the entire Purple Heart's sacred place into trouble hung over them. In the end, their weakness forced them to choose the preservation of the sacred place over their treasured talent. Malcolm, on the other hand, had already planned to kill Zen as soon as the battle ended. As per their way of doing things, once they killed Zen, they would compensate the humans with 10 sacred weapons. It didn't matter whether or not the humans agreed since the weapons were nothing but compensation in order to get out of being punished for breaking the rules. Malcolm had originally prepared to take action after Zen had finished the fight with Boris, but Cheryl, who was a divine-level talent in the Demon Knight, and also on par with Boris, suddenly came forward and challenged Zen. This sudden challenge wasn't something any of them expected, and this greatly delayed Malcolm's plan. However, he comforted himself with the thought that Zen would die sooner or later, and this was a sentiment shared, not just by the ogres, but by all other creatures in the tower, including the humans. However, there was another unexpected twist that suddenly happened. A sword spirit that belonged to the Demon Knight suddenly rushed forth from Zen's body and was found out to be the Queen of Demon Knight. The appearance of this queen completely changed the attitude of the entire race. Their initial plan of standing back and staying on the sidelines was quickly chucked out of the window. Both Fabian and Jared were equally flabbergasted. They really didn't know what was going on. Previously, the Demon Knight had taken a neutral stance. But now they made a decision that was to the human race's advantage. This decision was born from the fact that whether it be in the Tower of Sin or outside the Cursed Land, the Demon Knight refused to lose to the ogre race. This sudden realization made both of them smirk. "I knew it. I knew it," Olivia muttered repeatedly, her face red with excitement. She had noticed that Zen had been exceptionally confident, as if everything was right under his control. At first, she was puzzled and couldn't really pinpoint where his confidence stemmed from. But she now understood. Who would have thought Zen would actually have the Queen of Demon Knight with him? However, despite knowing the reason, Olivia couldn't help but feel as if there was still something strange. Just now, Zen had looked as if he had been caught off guard when the sword spirit beside him suddenly spoke, as if he wasn't expecting it at all. So Olivia couldn't be too sure about her earlier assumption. For all she knew, Zen might have not been aware this entire time, and the surprised look on his face was very suspicious. She had been observing him for quite a while and could now detect even the slightest changes in his expression. But then, if Zen had not been aware that his sword spirit was actually the Queen of the Demon Knight, where had he gotten his confidence from when he fought with Boris before? Could it be because he was ignorant of the fact that the one whom he would have to face was none other than the ogre warlord seat holder, Malcolm? It was all theories, and it messed with Olivia's mind. Of course, she could not know that Zen's confidence actually stemmed, not from the Demon Knight Queen, but from the fact that he had been acknowledged by the Tower of Sin's weapon spirit. He had the power to kick anyone out of the tower at any time. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the arena grew ever more intense. Even the whispers were gone and a few of the more timid creatures were gradually inching their way towards the exits. A fight between the ogre race and demon knight was bound to be ugly. There was no doubt that many of the warlords in the upper floors would involve themselves in the matter and paint the entire 10th floor with blood. Malcolm stepped forward. "It seems that the demon knight truly wants to declare war with us," he said, lifting his arm to the audience. His muscles contracted and the wound caused by Elder May instantly closed and stopped bleeding. A group of ogre warlords was quick to come down from the 11th floor, their faces looking formidable and their aura burning with the resolve to fight. A lot of creatures in the audience went pale in the face. It truly seemed as if a violent war was about to take place right here on the 10th floor. If a battle did start, anyone caught in the middle would surely lose their lives. However, no one had the balls to attempt an escape, not under the eyes of so many warlords. Their legs were heavy as lead while the weaker war generals were already trembling with fear from the powerful aura emitted by the gathered warlords. So many ogre warlords. There are more than 60 of them coming down from the upper floors. Someone murmured as they counted the ogres that were quickly making their way to the 10th floor. Those in the front row are all top-level warlords. They're also the 10 great warlords of the ogre race and the seat holders in the Tower of Sin. Someone else whispered, "That one in front is Maurice. He's ranked second among the 128 seat holders. He could be considered the strongest in the Tower of Sin." Ogre warlords came down from the 11th, 12th, 13th floors. But most terrifying of all were the 10 warlords who walked in front. These 10 were the most powerful warlords the ogre race had in the Tower of Sin. More than half of the ogres who had seats actually came. Maurice, the strongest of them all, held the helm. He wore fiery red armor whose lines spread all throughout, making it seem as if lava itself circulated in his body. Even before his arrival, there had already been a scorching aura that hung over the entire floor which made people feel as if they were about to face a towering volcano. Ogres all had impressive heights and enormous builds, so the audience felt as if dozens of small mountains were making their way towards them. The thumping footfalls on the floor were similar to the sound of oncoming giant elephants, and it made everyone briefly wonder if the tower could actually handle such heavy steps. They would have made these remarks known if not for the fact that all of them were so scared that they couldn't even breathe. Maurice walked over to Malcolm. "What happened?" he asked calmly. Malcolm quickly pointed to Zen. "I want to kill that brat from the human race, but Madeline and May from Demon Knight stood in my way. They even wounded me." "Oh." Maurice gave both Madeline and Elder May an icy glare. "It seems that the Demon Knight isn't planning on living peacefully with the ogres." Elder May and Madeline were both top-level warlords, the same as Maurice, but they still looked uneasy. The strength of the 128 seat holders differed greatly, and though Elder May was slightly stronger than Malcolm, she was still very much weaker than Maurice. But that look of unease quickly disappeared when they remembered that Lavender was behind them. Whether it was against a mere ant or the strongest of all ogres, they would go all out to protect the Demon Knight's queen. Both Elder May and Madeline would not hesitate to go through fire or tread water, even give up their lives and sell their souls just to protect the queen. There's no such thing as negotiation when it comes to the queen's safety. Elder May declared firmly as an overwhelmingly sharp aura emitted from her body. Her aura seemed more powerful than the scorching lava-like aura emitted from Maurice. "If that brat dies, we will let bygones be bygones," Maurice said. "Our queen is attached to that human's body, so he can't die." Elder May said firmly. A vicious light flashed in Maurice's eyes. "Is that so? If that's how it's gonna be, then let's fight it out." His figure immediately dashed forward, avoiding both Elder May and Madeline and making his way towards Zen. "Maurice, how dare you? Stop!" Both Madeline and Elder May screamed, their hearts pounding with anxiety as they tried to stop the ogre warlord from touching Zen. They did not think he would act so recklessly since the Demon Knight was still a powerful race. They didn't expect him to be this decisive. Just exactly who had his back? They both asked the puzzling question to themselves as they rushed to stop Maurice. Could it be that the ogres had acquired some kind of secret weapon? Or maybe they had gotten the backing of some mysterious masters in the Tower of Sin? Two huge hands were determined to grab him, but Zen was undaunted. He hurriedly jumped backward and dodged Maurice's attack. He might be brave, but he was not stupid and knew when to fight his battles. Even if Zen refined all the lucky light stored in his chest, the most he'd be able to challenge would be a level 3 or a level 4 warlord. Maurice was a top-level warlord and the most powerful one at that. He knew he stood no chance against him. The moment he saw him attack, Zen was quick to retreat back from the battle stage. Maurice sneered at Zen's actions. "Brat. You are merely a war fighter. Do you really think you have any chances of escaping?" he sneered. Madeline and Elder May then suddenly appeared beside Maurice, determined to immobilize him. Meanwhile, Lavender, the Queen of Demon Night, had gotten her black great sword and raised it high in the air. Stellar Body. Zen instantly activated his stellar body without hesitation and threw out a punch as he retreated. Star shakes the earth. Chapter 592, A Grave Silence. Maurice boiled with fury as Zen seemed to have a fighting spirit. He attacked while withdrawing back. No one ever dared to get on his nerves and challenge him. However, these were blows of a dying horse in Maurice's eyes. Losers never concede defeat despite their overthrow, as they still fight like a cornered wild monster. This is a futile battle and you are nothing close to a wild beast but an ant that can be simply suppressed and trampled upon. It's of no use putting up a fight. Maurice was determined to kill Zen, whom he thought was the primary source of all the pandemonium. As long as Zen died, the Demon Knight would have no connection with human race and would not dare to challenge the ogre race. The enthusiasm of getting rid of Zen stirred up Maurice's psyche. The aftermath of the Demon Knight revenging after eliminating Zen together with their queen was less of his interest. After all, the ogre race didn't fear them. There was starlight expelled, and it had been unmistakably clear. This was because of Zen's punch. Zen's punch was more influential and vigorous despite it being underestimated for a mild punch. The dim light emanated hidden force from the punch. In the real sense it was more energetic than it seemed, and it was even more powerful than any common cultivation technique. Snap. Being an ogre, Maurice was full of himself and assumed that he would smash the star radiance of Zen's fist. His hands were masculine, meaning they had tremendous power, but he didn't recognize that he chewed more than he could ingest. His confidence outweighed his capability. According to him, the potential he bore would be abundant to appease his ego while crushing the star radiance. There was a dazzling light that spurted out of Maurice's right hand. This was way far beyond his inferences, since according to him his energy could beat the star radiance. The dazzling light was initiated when the two fighters' fists struck. The forceful energy emitted from Maurice's hand was immensely strong. An excruciating intense pain erupted from Maurice's right hand because of the effect of the collision. His speed slackened. The fellow he assumed way below him had inflicted pain on his right hand. With confusion written all over his face, he lifted his right hand to check. Blood oozed from his hand and cracks had flared up. He howled out recklessly in disbelief. "Ha ha, how spectacular! A mere human war fighter has dared defy me and above all injure me." Elder May and Madeline had to safeguard Zen, who by now was in the arena's edge after withdrawing back. They stood in front of him to protect him. Lavender also flashed on Zen's side. She had the opportunity of striking with her sword, but she knew she wouldn't be able to hit Maurice. So she withdrew back and stood next to Zen, remaining as mute as a grave. Fabian and Jared exchanged glances and joined Zen while standing in front of him. "How enchanting, you two human clowns. No one has ever crossed my path, so who do you think you are to challenge me? By the look of things, you humans really don't want the seats in the Tower of Sin anymore." Malcolm uttered the words while over 60 ogre warlords followed him as he strode into the arena. The existence of many ogre warlords surrounding them meant more harm than good. The situation was tricky and troublesome for them since it was so complicated to tackle. The tallies and positions separated the high and mighty from the inferior ones. From this perception, the ogre warlords considered the humans as buffoons. Their positions gave them the title regarding the humans had only 4 seats in the Tower of Sin. In depth, 3 of the 4 human seat holders ranked lower than 100, and the only human seat holder who was considered outshining the 3 was only ranked 92nd. Fabian and Jared had envisaged what would happen to them if the ogres took the power, and that was why they didn't have second thoughts joining Zen. They had analyzed the positive and negative sides before deciding to join Zen. It was not an awful idea. Demon Knight was on Zen's side. This gave them a slight hope since the Demon Knight wasn't feebler than the ogres. They had been afraid previously because they were in no position to tackle the ogres by themselves. In the Tower of Sin, the ogres were strong, but the Demon Knight had the capacity to overshadow them. Zen planted a smirk on his face while glancing at Maurice, who was a stone's throw away. Acting as if all was well, he spoke calmly. "Huh. Are human seats handed out by you? Or is there a written policy that the ogre race is the only one entitled to determine everything in the Tower of Sin?" Many races from the Sea God continent had tried to repress the Tower of Sin. All the efforts had turned out to be futile. Finally they came to an agreement that the Tower of Sin was not entitled to a particular race. That was why so many races could send their talents into the Tower of Sin to cultivate. Maurice in a twinkle of an eye signaled the ogre warlords to attack. Zen's assertions were none of his business. An excellent move called for an advantage on his side. The human warlords and the demon knight warlords would be torn apart if the ogre warlords rushed forward. As he plotted his ambush, a crisp voice rang out, "Yes. The Tower of Sin belongs to all races. No specific race should be entitled to it. By the look of things your motions were wholly based on your own opinion without caring about other seat owners who also are a part and parcel of the Tower of Sin." Members of the Demon Knight in a dozen gathered at the entrance of the 11th floor. The highest percentage of them were feminine, but few males whose facial appearance displayed attractiveness were present. The sight of warlords of Demon Knight made Maurice's face turn dull. This changed his mood and his high spirits. According to the ranks, Maurice was the second despite him being considered the high and mighty. The top-ranked positions were all seized by the Demon Knight, who had a dozen seats in the Tower of Sin. Moreover, they had secured the first place among the 128 seats, which meant that the toughest seat holder came from the Demon Knight. Esther Ling was the holder of the first seat and the person who spoke just now. Esther Ling, with a buoyant attitude, led the warlords of the Demon Knight and proceeded towards them. She was confident and had faith in herself. She emitted an aura of tact and poise. Just a moment ago, the aura emitted from Maurice made many of the creatures on the 10th floor feel as if it submerged them in the lava. But now, they could feel vitality and vigor from Esther Ling's aura, as if they were in the spring when the snow had just melted. Everyone felt immediately revived and vigorous. Esther Ling led the many top-level warlords of the Demon Knight to ramble towards Lavender. Her eyes gazed across the group of people before her. Then she went down on one knee and greeted Lavender, "Your Majesty." All in unison the top-level warlords that followed Esther Ling acted and knelt down. After glancing at the top-level warlords, Lavender broke her silence and spoke, "Stand up." Glancing at Maurice, Esther Ling stood up and declared, "Long live our queen. Our lives are Her Majesty's." "Maurice, it's not a harsh task for you to have a second opinion before passing a hasty decision." The Demon Knight had grown in power over the past few years and had already surpassed the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and Dread Ogre Sacred Place. However, this race was not violent or bloodthirsty. So when facing the overbearing ogre race, they had always chosen to tolerate them. As long as the ogre race wasn't doing something out of the way, the Demon Knight wouldn't push them too much. But today the case was different. The Queen Lavender's presence changed everything. The Demon Knight didn't give in to their woes. Their queen meant everything, and Elder May had told Malcolm that if that meant eliminating Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and Dread Ogre Sacred Place at all costs, they would gladly do so. Maurice had to act fast as there were so many roadblocks on the way. It was now or never to get rid of Zen, who by all channels was consistently one step ahead of him. This was the only option he had, considering Esther Ling was present with other Demon Knight warlords. "Esther Ling, our ogre race will heartily give up 5 seats in exchange for the life of that lowlife Zen." 5 seats being granted voluntarily in exchange for Zen was an immense privilege and a walk in the park. The ogres had 26 seats in the Tower of Sin, while the Demon Knight had 16. If both parties came to a truce and the offer was to be accepted, then both sides would have an equal number of seats, with each having 21 seats. Having the gate pass to the Dark Nether Cave was a mouthwatering chance. Various races had been contemplating for this chance, and gaining one more seat meant that they had 5 more qualifications to get in the Dark Nether Cave. The humans had struggled for so many years, yet they only had 4 seats. But now, the ogres just offered 5 seats to the Demon Knight. This was equivalent to slicing a big bunch of meat off the ogre race, which was already a huge concession. And this concession was made only for the exchange of Zen's life. Fabian and Jared always freaked out, and Maurice's offer made them agitated. The deal was too good for Demon Knight to resist. Zen would be dead and the human race would be wiped out if the Demon Knight accepted the deal. The aftermath would be incredible. Fabian and Jared got it right. Maurice had exactly the hidden agenda to eliminate the human race. Human race being wiped out meant 4 seats would be entitled to the ogre race despite them losing 5 seats to the Demon Knight. Esther Ling couldn't help but force a plastic smile on her face. "Which part of my sentence don't you understand, and what language can I adopt for your brain to absorb?" "Maurice, let me elaborate this by a basic illustration. If our queen requests that everyone in the Demon Knight should end their lives, the over 1 million members would gladly do so. No one would put a knife on necks, but we would do so by our own will and without second thoughts. Get that clear in your head. The entire Demon Knight comprised 1,000,000 members. This was because they had a low reproduction ability. Despite that, they regarded themselves as elites, because they were born nature creatures. This described why their fighting techniques were on par with that of the human race with 100 million humans, despite the Demon Knight only having 1,000,000 members. Esterling's speech was true and not extravagant. Lavender had all the authorities. With all the vigor, the Demon Knight perceived lavender as a divine emblem. Other than being influential to the creatures of the lower world, she had authority even in the upper world. The faces of Maurice and all the other ogre top-level warlords darkened by Esterling's utterances. In brief, you mean that you are not ready to comply with my terms? Maurice said firmly. That's right. That's my ultimate verdict. Esterling nodded. You resolve to settle this through a war between our ogre race and Demon Knight, is that your final remark in this matter? Maurice repeated. Yes, that's our final comment and we will abide by it. Esterling stood firm in her decision and nodded again. Ha 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 ha. Maurice suddenly raised his head and giggled fiercely. His raucous roar was so mighty that it resounded throughout the entire 10th floor. You Demon Knight think you have grown powerful enough to challenge our ogre race? Esterling frowned. Madeline's and Elder May's eyebrows furrowed. The way Maurice reacted implied that the ogre race had a secret trump card under their sleeve in the Tower of Sin. Their actions spoke louder. The Demon Knight was more robust than the ogres in the Tower of Sin. If a war broke out between them, the Demon Knight would hold the winning title. It was discerned that the Demon Knight contained a peculiar expertise with Amber on their side. They would wipe out the ogre warlords present. If Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and Dread Ogre Sacred Place started a war, their chances of winning the battle against the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place which belonged to the Demon Knight were slight. In the effect of the battle, both sides would suffer great losses. The Heavenly Feather Sacred Place could be back at its feet with Amber assisting them. The Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and Dread Ogre Sacred Place would have a rough time re-establishing themselves. This would contribute to vengeance from the diverse races in indignation. What was Maurice clinging on as a backup? Or what were these ogres relying on? Maurice suddenly shouted, his tone proving courage. Patriarch Colin, Patriarch Neil, time has occurred to reveal yourselves. Thump, 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 2 ogres walked down majestically from the 11th floor. An intimidating aura was produced due to the great thumps of the ogres. It was 10 times more powerful than that of Maurice. Seeing the 2 ogres, Esterling couldn't help but blurt out, Colin. Neil, weren't those ogres perceived to be dead? Why? War sages. War sages appeared in the Tower of Sin. In the midst, one yelled out. This was like bumping into a dead man alive. Seeing those 2 ogres, Zen's heart suddenly sank. The ogre race could now celebrate as they had strong ones who had reached the level of War Sage, and the Demon Knight was still in the darkness concerning this issue. How on earth could War Sages step into the cursed land and enter the Tower of Sin? Relating to Phoebe's words, this was like a reverie. How was this even possible? Esterling thought with her eyes wide open in shock. According to the hierarchy, the highest ranking in the Sea God continent was the Soul Sea Realm Masters. Below the Soul Sea Realm were War Sages, and down further were Warlords, War Generals, and the hierarchy continued. There were usually only a few powerful masters in the Soul Sea Realm in each sacred place. The War Sages formed the real backbone of the forces. Tower of Sin had rules. These measures were put from its existence. The rule was that no Soul Sea Realm Masters or War Sages could enter the Cursed Land. If any of them dared to go against this rule, they would perish. The rule was in place ever since the emergence of Tower of Sin, and nothing changed. A particular trend cropped up because of the restrictions imposed on the Cursed Land. All the races decided to create transmission arrays, and most of them led to the Cursed Land. To those warriors below the level of War Sage, these transmission arrays were nothing more than ordinary transmission arrays. However, for War Sages and Soul Sea Realm Masters, they were baits and could end their lives. Back then, many War Sages and a small number of Soul Sea Realm Masters from different races ended up dead in the Cursed Land. This resulted in they being duped and sweet-talked to enter the transmission arrays. That was how they perished. Later it had become an unwritten rule on the Sea God continent that both War Sages and Soul Sea Realm Masters didn't use transmission arrays. Nothing prepared them to what they would encounter if they randomly entered any transmission array. They had to be extra cautious, since not refraining from entering the transmission array that led them to the Cursed Land was dangerous. They would encounter a shameful death. In front of them were the two war sages who suddenly appeared in the Tower of Sin. Lots of top-level warlords who witnessed stood in disbelief. There were tests that were carried out by the Demon Knight and Ogre race earlier on. They had tried to make their top-level warlords break through to the next level directly in the Tower of Sin. There was a curse. Anyone who fought in the cursed land would suffer the consequences. The effect was death. Such barriers didn't exist in the Tower of Sin. This led to races figuring out that if war sages and soul sea realm masters were not allowed to enter the Tower of Sin, would it work if warlords made the breakthrough in the Tower of Sin and became war sages there? Would the whole process elude them from the punishment? The result was surprising. The curse never inflicted any casualty at first. Those martial artists who managed to become war sages in the Tower of Sin were not eliminated by the curse. However, that was short-lived. After they promoted themselves to war sages and stayed in the Tower of Sin for 10 days, the effects of the curse were seen since one after the other newly turned war sages died. Perhaps it was because they were in the Tower of Sin. Those who completed their breakthrough and became war sages in the Tower of Sin did not die immediately. While those war sages who had directly rushed into the cursed land almost died a miserable death right on the spot in an instant. The few war sages who reached the new level from the top-level warlords in the Tower of Sin had a chronic death. Their body would fester and start rotting gradually. They would suffer all kinds of pain and finally die in agony. That experience frightened the top-level warlords of any race. The thought of that held them back from breaking through in the Tower of Sin. Instead, they opted to leave the Tower of Sin and the cursed land when they planned to make a breakthrough. They went for good without returning. Colin and Neil were not strangers to Esterling and the top-level warlords of the Demon Knight. Having been the top-level warlords previously, the two ogres also had been seat owners. They had searched for golden chances in the dark nether cave which cut their lives short. It shocked Esterling as well as the other creatures who thought they were dead all this while. As if that was not enough, they had broken through and become war sages. The most shocking part was to see them in the Tower of Sin. Esterling was more shocked by this news. This revelation too shocked the Demon Knight. According to the situation at hand, the ogres were alert and knew of the two ogres. They knew they had a backup support. Now Madeline and Elder May realized why Malcolm and Maurice were full of themselves when they confronted them. After all, they had two more superior beings. We are ruined. Fabian looked at Jared. Fear took control of his body. How would he act like everything was normal now? Jared wasn't any better than Fabian and fear also engulfed him. Everything took a different turn now. After believing that they had seen a light at the end of the tunnel, he suddenly found that everything was shattered. Everything, not even the surrounding, was safe and fresh to feel confident in. The human race was troubled. They had counted their eggs before they hatched. They had felt lucky to have the Demon Knight on their side, but the emergence of the two ogres ruined everything. They tried figuring out how the ogre war sages had managed to appear here without receiving any punishment. Had the ogre race worked out a way to break the spell of the cursed land and be alive? This was impossible. Having existed for many years, the curse of the cursed land was not easy to break. It was next to impossible for anyone to survive the curse and break it. The two being in front of them alive and kicking answered their questions. They had survived, and now their presence had one agenda. Esther, haha, you are still a top-level warlord. Me being alive and kicking was the last thing you would have thought, right? Colin burst into sarcastic laughter. There was a reason Esterling didn't become a sage earlier. Neither the Demon Knight nor the Heavenly Feather Sacred Land wanted Maurice to be the strongest person among the seat owners. The competition was intense in the Tower of Sin. If she broke through, she had no option but to leave the Tower of Sin. This would leave Maurice with all the privileges, which was something that neither Demon Knight nor the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place would expect to see. Unless another top-level warlord emerged and was able to overcome Maurice, Esther's hands were tied and she had to continue to suppress her cultivation level. But if a top-level warlord appeared in the Demon Knight and could defeat Maurice, Esterling would then leave the Tower of Sin, leave the cursed land, and return to the sacred place of Demon Knight to break through. Back then Colin and Neil were both top-level warlords, the same as Esterling. However, Esterling was way much ahead of Colin and Neil. At that time, Colin and Neil only ranked after top 40, which made them no matches for Esterling. Tables turned. Colin and Neil had both become war sages while Esther was still a top-level warlord. The once defeated foes had surpassed her. Her facial expression was like an open book that both Collins and Neil could read. The two ogres' appearance destroyed everything. The equity and balance created would now be in favor of the ogres. This would mean that the demon knight was in hot soup. They would face the wrath of the ogres. I wonder how did you pull through? You have already become war sages. What's the secret to you having no barriers entering the Tower of Sin? Esterling asked. Ha ha ha, Patriarch Colin laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha. Neil joined him as he let out a hysterical laugh. There was a sarcastic laughter in the 10th floor of the Tower of Sin. Maurice, Malcolm and the ogre top-level warlords laughed all in unison. Their faces described happy souls trying to mimic the surprised face of Esterling. Before the other races came to protest the monopoly of the ogre race on the Tower of Sin, the ogre race was at the height of power and splendor and it almost dominated the Tower of Sin. However, after the other races formed allies and forced them to share the Tower of Sin, the situation for the ogre race declined. After Amber appeared, the Black Horse led the Heavenly Feather's sacred place to soar to the top. For the past 100 years, whether it was outside of the Cursed Land or inside the Tower of Sin, the Demon Knight had been suppressing the ogres wherever they went. Although the ogres were extremely annoyed, they didn't have any way to change the situation. Most of time, they could only bear with it and swallow the pain. Everything was turned around. Today, the 2 ogre war sages were present in the Tower of Sin. A war sage was so mighty that it could sweep through the entire Tower of Sin. Considering the strongest martial artist in the Tower of Sin was only a top-level warlord, the 2 mighty war sages with the ogres meant super powerful combination. The powerful collaboration of ogre war sages and ogre warlords implied that the Tower of Sin would be under control of the ogres again. Zen was so pissed off by the hysterical laughter of the ogre top-level warlords and the 2 war sages. How could they dare laugh especially on this critical situation? Zen suddenly shook his head with a bored look. He took a deep breath, then infused his life vitality into his chest and suddenly shouted out loud, "What is so funny that you 2 dunderheads are laughing about? What's so special about being war sages?" The ogre top-level warlords and the 2 war sages only laughed in a hasty manner. They did not use their forceful energy when they laughed to intimidate the crowd, while Zen had infused life vitality when he shouted. So his loud voice instantly drowned out all the laughter. There was a grave silence on the 10th floor of the Tower of Sin. One would think there was no one present. This was after Zen ended uttering his words. Chapter 593, Get Out of Here. The current situation was extremely disadvantageous for both the Demon Knight and Zen himself. The number of the Demon Knight warlords at top level was lower than that of the ogre warlords, but because of the powerful individuals in the Demon Knight, the overall strength of the Demon Knight members was higher than the strength of the ogres. However, the sudden appearance of 2 ogre war sages put both the Demon Knight and the human race at an absolute disadvantage. But even in such a situation, Zen dared to berate the ogres in a brazen manner. Upon seeing that, all the living creatures wondered whether Zen had gone crazy. The smiles on Colin's and Neil's faces gradually faded away. The smiles of the ogre warlords at top level also disappeared. Today could be considered the day of the ogres, showdown with other races. Since 2 ogre war sages had appeared in the Tower of Sin, the power of the ogres had greatly increased. Although the 2 ogre sacred places couldn't threaten the Demon Knight's Heavenly Feather's sacred place outside the Cursed Land, no race in the Tower of Sin could resist the ogres. The superhuman talent, Zen. Separated by the crowd of Demon Knight warlords, Colin let out a sinister laugh. Do you think you can do anything you want just because you have the protection of the Demon Knight? Or are your eyes so blinded by others that you're not able to see the situation unfold? At this moment, even Esther and the other top-level warlords of the Demon Knight had indignant expressions for Zen. They had no choice but to put their lives at risk to protect Zen for their queen. Lavender was still in the form of a sword spirit following Zen around, but the current situation was completely out of control. Esther was wondering about the price they'd have to pay to protect Zen. After the words Zen had just uttered, it was going to be very difficult for them to deal with this situation and wind this matter up. The appearance of the 2 ogre war sages meant that the authority over the Tower of Sin was in the hands of the ogres. Fabian secretly asked Jared through his life vitality, "What is this guy doing? He shouldn't be such a stupid person. Could it be that Zen has someone else to rely on?" Jared was also confused because he couldn't figure out the reason why Zen was acting this way. Olivia was the only one who stared at Zen with a gleam in her eyes. She was certain that Zen had some kind of trump card up his sleeve. By now, she had already guessed that the appearance of the Demon Knight named Lavender was completely beyond Zen's expectation. But Lavender wasn't Zen's trump card. So what was his real trump card? Could it be that his real trump card was so strong that Zen wasn't even afraid of the Ogre War Sages? Olivia couldn't figure it out, but she knew that there was no need for her to overthink it. She knew that Zen could turn the situation around no matter what. Zen, don't spout nonsense. For the sake of the Demon Knight's queen, Esther controlled her temper and turned to the ogres. Colin, Neil, I don't care how you entered the Tower of Sin. Zen cannot be killed. If you dare to touch him, our Heavenly Feather's sacred place definitely won't let you off. You should consider it clearly. I think there's still room for negotiation. Esther, you probably haven't figured out the situation yet, Colin said lazily. We just want that guy to die. No more negotiation. Then, I want to see how you're going to deal with our two ogre sacred places. After Colin finished speaking, the forceful energy within Colin's and Neil's bodies erupted as they prepared to make their move. The aura of the two powerful ogre war sages was very fierce indeed. As their energy surged, the top-level warlords of the Demon Knight became startled. It seemed that they wouldn't be able to avoid a battle with the ogres. So far, the Demon Knight members hadn't been afraid of the ogres. But now, with the arrival of the two ogre war sages, the situation was completely different. At this moment, Zen laughed again, pointing at the two ogre war sages. It's a pity. Although the two of you are war sages and you've painstakingly entered the Tower of Sin, you're about to die right now. A mixture of doubt and astonishment appeared on everyone's faces. Would Zen really be able to deal with these two war sages? Zen, do you know what you're talking about? Esther asked. Zen nodded. Of course. Do you really have confidence in dealing with the two war sages? Esther asked curiously. Zen just smiled in response. At this moment, Lavender was still standing indifferently by Zen's side, not saying a word. As she was in the form of the sword spirit, she was attached to Zen's body. She was aware of everything that Zen had experienced at the Talent Tablet. Suddenly, Zen pointed at the two ogre war sages and said coldly, "Both of you, get out of the Tower of Sin." Since Zen had been accepted by the Celestial Position race, the weapon spirit naturally did as he said. Everyone felt an invisible wave appear in the space of the 10th floor. This wave didn't seem to come from any living being but from the Tower of Sin itself. At the same time, the wall at the side of the arena began to vibrate continuously before a huge crack appeared in the middle. Colin and Neil watched the scene in front of them with shocked expressions. It was true that they could stay in the Tower of Sin for a short period of time, but that didn't mean that they could resist the killing curse power of the cursed land. If they stepped into the cursed land, they would be killed instantly. If the wall split open, there would be nothing separating the Tower of Sin from the cursed land. And the moment Colin and Neil so much as set foot on the cursed land, they would die without a doubt. Even a master of the Soul Sea realm would die if he set foot on the cursed land. When Mist had returned to the central region as an immortal, he had been unable to enter the cursed land to obtain the important inheritance. This meant that even an immortal wouldn't be able to resist the power of the curse. So naturally, after seeing the crack in the wall, the two ogre war sages felt an ominous sense of foreboding and their hearts leapt to their throats. An invisible force swept past the heads of the crowd and, suddenly transforming into two giant hands, grabbed Colin and Neil and dragged them toward the crack. What is this? Let go of me. After being engulfed by the invisible force, the two ogre war sages continuously struggled against it in panic. A surge of forceful energy erupted from their bodies as they tried to break free from the pair of invisible hands. A war sage's strength could match up to that of a master of the life and death realm in the central region. However, the two of them weren't able to break free from the grip of the large hands even though they were struggling with all their might. Many of the living creatures' faces were also filled with shock. If the war sages themselves weren't able to break free of the invisible force, the top-level warlords present definitely wouldn't be able to resist it. No wonder Zen had a fearless expression on his face. He seemed to be manipulating the Tower of Sin. These races had been researching the Tower of Sin for a long time and they had thoroughly analyzed the characteristics of the various equipment inside the tower. Many living creatures believed that the Tower of Sin was actually a living being and had its own consciousness. This tower had absorbed the blood and corpses of countless warriors over the years. It had also devoured innumerable weapons. However, until now, no one had come into contact with the consciousness of the Tower of Sin. Now, it seemed that not only had Zen come into contact with the consciousness of the tower, but he had even received the recognition of that consciousness. It was also very likely that this mysterious occurrence was happening inside the Talent Tablet. Many creatures were able to come to this conclusion. In fact, their guesses were close to the fact. But even so, guessing the truth wasn't very meaningful. The talent tablet had been around for so many years, but how many warriors had been able to get their names placed on the first row? Except for Yolanda and Zen, there was no one else. Zen had even been admitted to the celestial position. It wasn't an easily obtainable honor. The two invisible hands continued dragging the two ogre war sages toward the crack. As for Maurice, Malcolm, and the other top-level ogre warlords, they could only watch in horror. At this point, there seemed to be nothing they could do. It would be fine if the two large hands were dragging two top-level warlords. They would be thrown out of the Tower of Sin, but they wouldn't be harmed at all if they entered the Cursed Land. However, once the war sages entered the Cursed Land, they would definitely die. Everyone held their breath as they watched the two ogre war sages being thrown out of the Tower of Sin. The entire tower was buried deep in the ground, so there were layers of soil outside of the 10th floor. The invisible large hands dragged the two war sages out of the tower and then continued to drag them upward. In the end, the war sages broke through the thick layer of earth and ended up on the surface. Colin and Neil stood by the side of the Tower of Sin and glanced at each other, fear and trepidation appearing on their faces. The two ogre war sages who had been extremely proud of themselves just moments ago now felt the god of death slowly approaching them. Charge in. As long as they entered the Tower of Sin, they would still have a chance of survival. The power of the curse wouldn't appear instantly. With that thought, they activated all the forceful energy in their bodies and charged toward the door of the Tower of Sin. The two giant guards at the door saw two blobs of light quickly approaching them. The power that exploded out of those lights was so massive that the guards didn't dare to stand by the door anymore. They hurriedly ran to the side and watched the scene unfold in front of them. Although Colin and Neil were moving at a high speed, many black spots had already appeared on the surface of their bodies. Chapter 594, Adoration. The two war sages charged toward the door of the Tower of Sin at an extremely fast speed. Even though the door of the tower wasn't opened yet, the two war sages had already pushed the forceful energy in their bodies to the limit. Just what sort of impact was there going to be? They were going fast enough to form a big hole in the wall of the tower, let alone the door. Clang. As expected, the door of the tower was instantly smashed into pieces and the two war sages charged into the first floor. Aside from those on the 10th floor and above, the war fighters and generals below were completely unaware of what was happening. On the first floor of the tower, a fierce battle was currently taking place. A war fighter from the Knight group was battling with a war fighter from the Giant. The war fighter of the Knight group was skilled at assassination and concealment, so his movements were extremely agile. He circled around his opponent, waiting for an opportunity to strike a deadly blow. However, the war fighter from the Giant brandished a black iron rod, protecting himself thoroughly without leaving any room for his opponent to attack him. As the two war fighters sized each other up, everyone watching them suddenly heard a heaven-shaking sound coming from the door. They turned and saw two ogres standing in the hall on the first floor of the tower. Fear appeared in the eyes of all the creatures as they stared at the ogres. How strong are these two ogres? Why can't I see through them? They seem to be ogre warlords. No. 2 years ago, I met a top-level ogre warlord, but he didn't give me this much pressure. These two ogres are probably war sages. Shoot, how can war sages enter the cursed land? As soon as they step into the cursed land, they will be killed by the curse. The war fighters on the first floor discussed seriously among themselves as they looked at the two ogre war sages. Neil and Colin had exhausted too much forceful energy just now. They were war sages, and their bodies had been stimulated by body-refining techniques and were incomparably strong, but they were panting heavily now. So close, Neil heaved. The cursed land isn't as powerful as we thought. Colin turned to look at Neil, and a mixture of shock and fear appeared on his face. Pointing at Neil, he stammered, You. What's wrong? There was a puzzled expression on Neil's face, but it soon turned into terror. Large black spots began appearing on their faces. Some of the spots split open and black pus flowed out. The curse was finally beginning to show its power. The bodies of the two war sages suddenly began to collapse. Their skin, flesh, and their bones festered. Their bodies, which had originally been like small mountains, were now like melting snowmen. Neil and Colin howled in pain as their bodies disintegrated. In the end, they turned into a puddle of tainted blood on the ground. The scene gave the ogre war fighters on the first floor a fright. What is going on? Don't you see? You were right. These two ogres weren't top-level warlords. They must have been war sages at least. That was why they were killed by the curse. But it's strange, how did the two of them get past the cursed land and enter the Tower of Sin? Even if the two ogre war sages had come through the transmission array, they would have still had to cover quite a distance from the transmission array to the Tower of Sin. The cursed land was not small by any means. They should have been cursed to death as soon as they entered the cursed land. But why didn't they die until now? Many of the war fighters couldn't understand it either. At this moment, on the 10th floor of the tower, the hole in the wall began to wiggle and quickly clamped close like a monster's mouth. There was silence on the floor and all the creatures had an incredulous expression on their faces. Esther shot a meaningful glance to the side. A war general of the Demon Knight floated out like the wind, heading toward the 9th floor of the Tower of Sin. It was obvious that he was going to the other floors to gather information. Maurice ordered a junior member to climb to the 1st floor of the tower as well. But of all the creatures present, the top-level ogre warlords were the most nervous. Maurice knew very well that Colin and Neil weren't truly immune to the curse of the cursed land. The truth was that the ogres had thought of a way to keep the war sages in the tower. The tower itself could counteract a portion of the curse's killing ability in the cursed land. Once, after an ogre top-level warlord became a war sage, he lived for a month in the tower before being killed by the curse. In theory, if there was a transmission array in the Tower of Sin, the war sages and the Soul Sea Realm warriors of various great races would be able to temporarily stay in the tower. As long as they could leave through the transmission array within a month, they would be able to safely return to their respective sacred places. But because of the tower's special characteristics, it was impossible to draw a transmission array inside. Other than living beings, the tower would devour almost anything inside it, including weapons and corpses. Whatever was left in the tower for a period of time would be absorbed by the tower. Some races had thought of ways to set up transmission arrays in the tower, but the arrays could only be set up halfway before being devoured by the tower. Therefore, using a transmission array to deliver war sages and Soul Sea Realm warriors wouldn't work. However, 10 years ago, the ogres had come up with another idea. During the month when the Dark Nether Deathlight in the Dark Nether Cave was greatly weakened, the seat owners at the top of the tower had led their respective clansmen into the cave to explore. At that time, Neil and Colin had been two of over 20 ogre seat owners. After a month of exploration, regardless of whether they had obtained the right opportunity or not, all creatures had to return to the Tower of Sin. If they didn't return by then, they could never return. The power of the Dark Nether Deathlight was not something a warlord could withstand. But at that time, Neil and Colin had unexpectedly discovered a secret passage at the top of the tower. The secret passage was small and could only accommodate 2 people. Moreover, it just happened to be able to avoid the Dark Nether Deathlight. Colin and Neil had hidden in this secret passage to cultivate instead of returning to the Tower of Sin. Even among the ogres, only the top 10 top-level warlords and a few of the higher-ups of the Flaming Ogre's Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre's Sacred Place knew about the 2 trump cards. Today, since an irreconcilable conflict had occurred between the ogres and the Demon Knight, the ogres had decided that it was time for them to use their trump cards. They had thought that once the 2 war sages appeared, Esther and the other top-level warlords of the Demon Knight would be too weak to face them, giving the ogres an overwhelming advantage. Never had they imagined that Zen would use some strange method to expel the 2 war sages from the Tower of Sin. Without a doubt, this scene would become a nightmare that would be repeatedly played in the minds of the top-level ogre warlords. As for Fabian and Jared, the 2 top-level warlords of the human race, they had extremely excited expressions on their faces now. Zen was revealing his cards one by one, shocking them time and again. Every time they saw Zen pull a mind-blowing stunt, it would take them some time and effort to finally manage to accept it, but Zen would follow it up with an even bigger miracle. In fact, many people, including Fabian, Jared, Olivia, and Dylan, had been shocked by Zen so many times that they almost felt numb now. Even if someone were to come and tell them that Zen was the savior sent by the heavens to save them, they would accept it numbly because they no longer knew what to think. No one had imagined that the ogres would send 2 war sages, but Zen had defeated them as easily as falling off a log. Who else but him could be the savior? In a corner of the arena, Olivia's eyes were filled with tears. Zen had become the only man in her heart. He was perfect. She had already loved Zen, but now, the affection in her heart had been replaced by adoration. Before long, the people that Esther and Maurice had sent to the upper floors to collect information returned. After they reported what had happened through their life vitality, Esther's face revealed a faint smile. As for Maurice, his face was filled with dejection. Although the two of them didn't announce the fate of the ogre war sages out loud, their expressions clearly showed everything. Chapter 595, Amber. Esther shot Zen a meaningful look. With Zen's mysterious ways, he didn't even need the help of the demon knight, the ogres wouldn't be able to do anything to him. At this moment, Esther couldn't help thinking about how fortunate it was that Zen was close to Lavender. It was precisely because of this that the demon knight didn't have any enmity with him. But even if the demon knight and the ogres joined forces, they wouldn't be able to go up against Zen in the Tower of Sin. Esther's gaze finally stopped on Maurice as she said coldly, "Maurice, do you still want to kill Zen now?" Maurice's eyes twitched as he pulled a long face. After a long while, he spat out, "Let's go." Without the two war sages, the ogres didn't have any advantage over the demon knight. Furthermore, there was also Zen to deal with. Since even the war sages hadn't been able to defeat him, there was no point in the top-level warlords fighting against him. The ogre warlords turned around and prepared to leave with Maurice. Meanwhile, Malcolm was staring intently at Zen. Zen was a mere level 10 war fighter, and Malcolm had thought that he could kill him effortlessly. However, he had just seen Zen get rid of the two ogre war sages. If they didn't kill Zen while he was still young, he would become a huge threat to the ogres in the future. But how could they kill him? No one could give Malcolm an answer. He had interpreted the smile on Zen's face as an indication that he was trying his best to remain calm. But now he realized that Zen was smiling because he was confident of himself. In the end, Malcolm could only grit his teeth and follow Maurice. Some of the warriors had enough foresight to understand that the situation in the Tower of Sin was going to change. It was likely that the 128 seats on the top floor of the tower would be reshuffled. The ogres' bodies were as large as mountains. After they left, the 10th floor seemed somewhat empty. Only then did Esther ask, "Zen, how did you do it?" Zen had thrown the two war sages out of the Tower of Sin without so much as lifting a finger, and the war sages hadn't even had the strength to fight back. Esther couldn't figure it out. "Don't ask," Lavender said flatly. Hearing Lavender's words, Esther immediately nodded. "Yes, Queen." Everyone had their own secrets. Esther was curious about the truth, but since Lavender didn't want her to ask, she wasn't going to continue probing into it. After the ogre warlords left, Esther ordered the warlords of the demon knight to leave as well. It was then that the war generals on the 10th floor began to whisper among themselves. Lavender turned to Zen. "Let's make a trip to the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. I have something very important to do." "Can it wait?" "Let's go after I completely refine the lucky light," Zen said. "Sure." Lavender raised her gaze and looked at Yolanda, who was in the audience. Yolanda had been observing the entire arena from start to finish in silence, without the slightest change in expression. Now that their eyes met, there was a change in both Lavender's and Yolanda's expressions. Lavender walked toward Yolanda. "I know you," she said indifferently. A formless aura emanated from Lavender's body at all times. This aura did not originate from her soul but from the Queen's aura that had been nurtured over the countless years she had been in power. Facing such an imposing aura, any weaker being that stood in front of Lavender wouldn't be able to help but kneel. However, Yolanda didn't seem to be affected by her aura in the slightest. "I know you too," she said indifferently. "I hope you'll succeed," Lavender said. Her words sounded strange. Yolanda blinked her eyes. "If I can succeed, I'll help you." "Thank you." Lavender nodded, unexpectedly giving her a smile. The conversation between the two was completely baffling. However, Zen, who was standing beside them, was able to catch some clues from it. According to what Phoebe had said, the queens of the Demon Knight were not from this world but from the upper world. Lavender was the queen of all the Demon Knight members. Since Lavender and Yolanda knew each other, it meant that Yolanda was from the upper world as well. The two of them must have known each other from the time they were in the upper world. But why was there a Yolanda in the central region and another Yolanda on the Sea God continent? It seemed that Zen would have to find an opportunity to ask Lavender this question. After talking to Yolanda, Lavender turned to Esther and said, "After Zen refines the lucky light, we'll go to the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place." "Yes, Queen," Esther, Madeline, and Elder May said in unison, giving Lavender a salute. Lavender transformed into red dots of light and disappeared into Zen's body. After Zen retrieved his sword, he walked toward Olivia. A warm smile appeared on Olivia's face before he even got close, as if she was watching the triumphant arrival of the hero. "Thank you," Zen said to Fabian and Jared. The truth was, the appearance of Fabian and Jared, the two human seat owners, hadn't changed the situation in the slightest. However, the humans had stood up at the most critical moment and tried to protect Zen. That was why Zen wanted to thank them and offer them his help. If they hadn't stood up for him when he was in danger and just treated him as a compatriot that they could gain benefits from, then Zen wouldn't offer them his help even though they were fellow humans. "We were just doing the right thing. We're all human beings, after all," Jared said. "Unfortunately, we are too weak to fight against the ogres. Even if we want to fight them, we are powerless. You're not to blame for that. I'll always remember that you stood up for me when I was in danger," Zen said. If Zen had been killed, the Demon Knight wouldn't have encountered too much trouble, but the humans would have. They would have definitely faced the ogres' revenge. The humans in the Tower of Sin would have suffered, and even the Purple Heart's sacred place would have been affected. The ogres would have taken the opportunity to completely wipe out the humans' sacred place. For the two ogres' sacred places, this wasn't a difficult matter. As long as they could deal with the elders at the Soul Sea realm in the Purple Heart sacred place, it would be enough. "I'll go to the Purple Heart sacred place, but before that, I have to go to the Heavenly Feather sacred place. Just wait for me," Zen promised with a smile. Fabian and Jared smiled back at Zen in gratitude. It was unprecedented for warlords to be so grateful toward a warfighter. The two of them clearly understood the meaning behind Zen's words. Since he had already achieved this much, he would be bringing the human race along with him as he rose to power. Although only 2 ogre war sages had died today, they believed that in the near future, the entire Tower of Sin would be reshuffled. Zen turned around and left, heading to the living area. He wanted to rent a training room to refine the lucky light. Looking at his retreating figure, Olivia wanted to say something, but decided otherwise. As Zen sat quietly in the secret chamber, a smile appeared on his face. He suddenly realized how crowded his body was. Not only were there 9 genuine dragons lurking in his mind, but there was also a huge furnace with an unknown origin. The sword spirit in his body was actually one of the queens of the Demon Knight, and she still had her own consciousness. This was really lively. Shaking his head, Zen pulled out the lucky light from his token and slowly began to refine it. Boris and Cheryl were the strongest among the level 10 war generals. Both of them hadn't lost any of their previous battles, so there was an awful lot of lucky light stored in their tokens. When Zen drew out the lucky light, the blazing white light was unimaginably thick. With so much lucky light, I should be able to make a breakthrough. When he thought of this, the life vitality within his body suddenly revolved and traces of life vitality continuously refined the lucky light, pouring it into his body. 3 days later, Zen left the training chamber. Cheryl, who was standing in front of the training chamber, gave him a broad smile. The Demon Knight members were waiting for Zen to come out. Of course, what they wanted to see wasn't Zen himself but the sword spirit in his body, which was also their Queen Lavender. Zen nodded and said to Cheryl, "We can set off now." Although Zen was short on time, he had to take Lavender to the Heavenly Feather sacred place since he had already agreed to it. Moreover, there was still quite a bit of time before the Dark Nether Cave would open. Even if Zen wanted to return to the central region, he would have to wait until he entered the Dark Nether Cave and obtained the inheritance inside it. So, he still had plenty of time. Under Cheryl's lead, Zen returned to the first floor of the Tower of Sin. After waiting at the entrance for a while, Esther, the strongest of the seat owners, brought 2 top-level warlords over. They all left the Tower of Sin together and headed south of the Cursed Land. Flying was forbidden within the Cursed Land. Whoever tried to fly would be pressed down to the ground by a horrible force. Zen had experienced this before when he first entered the Cursed Land. So, everyone could only travel on foot. Still, with their speed, they covered quite a distance within just a few hours. Soon, a large transmission array appeared in front of them. Cheryl rushed forward first and took out several life vitality crystals from her pocket. Then, she placed them on the transmission array. Once the life vitality crystals were placed, the entire transmission array erupted with light. "Go in," Esther nodded at Zen. Zen immediately stepped into the transmission array, knowing that it would lead to the Demon Knight's Heavenly Feather sacred place. Soon after, a blue light enveloped them and they all traveled through the transmission channel. After about 5 minutes, the transmission channel came to an end. When the light dissipated, Zen could smell the faint fragrance of flowers. This was very different from the scenery of the cursed land. Apart from the various races in the cursed land, there was no sign of life there. But here, there was an emerald green jungle. There were all sorts of lush vegetation and colorful flowers bloomed all around. It was like a paradise on earth. When Zen raised his head, he saw that there was an incomparably large tree in the distance. That big tree is? Zen asked. It is the holy tree of our sacred place. Every sacred place of the Demon Knight has a holy tree, Cheryl explained with a smile. The Demon Knight's method of reproduction was completely different from what Zen had imagined. When a baby was born, the baby would be kept within the holy tree where it would absorb the natural energy. Because of this, the physical quality of the members of the Demon Knight was much better than the physical quality of the other races. In addition, from the moment they were born, there would be no impurities within their bodies. They were born nature creatures. This was the reason why the members of the Demon Knight were so much more powerful than the other races. However, the world was fair. The Demon Knight was strong, but their ability to reproduce was very weak. Even though the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place was known as a 7th grade sacred place, the entire sacred place only had around 1 million members. As for the Human's Purple Heart Sacred Place, its population was 100 times larger than the Demon Knight's, even though it was only a mere 6th grade sacred place. At this time, the red light around Zen flashed, and little rays of light slowly condensed and formed into a figure, Lavender. Cheryl, Esther, and the others reflexively knelt toward Lavender as soon as she appeared. Seeing this scene, Zen was speechless. It turned out that the members of the Demon Knight respected their queen very much. Lavender didn't look at them at all. Instead, she looked at the holy tree in the distance and said, "Stand up." Then, she turned to Zen. "We're going there." Zen leapt into the air and sped away with Lavender. Esther, Cheryl, and the rest followed behind him. During the flight, Zen moved close to Lavender. Why do you know Yolanda?" "Because I know her," Lavender replied nonchalantly. Zen rolled his eyes. "I've met a Yolanda in the eastern region who looks exactly the same as her." "What's going on? Are they the same person?" "Yes," Lavender nodded. "They are one person." But, Zen was about to say something, but Lavender interrupted him. "The upper world has many cultivation methods. Some cultivation methods may seem unfathomable to you. The fact is, there's more than one Yolanda. If you search carefully in the lower world, you might be able to find 1 million Yolandas." 1 million Yolandas? Zen's jaw dropped. Lavender nodded. "Perhaps even more, and they're all indeed the same person." "How can that be?" Zen asked curiously. "It's very simple. Yolanda used a special method to split her soul into 1 million pieces. Then, she sent the pieces to many different worlds to cultivate and gain combat experience. At some point, she will recollect all the pieces of her soul and merge them into one. At that time, her cultivation will grow to a terrifying level." These words once again silenced Zen. He understood now. Back when he had met Yolanda in White Emperor City of the Eastern region, she had been training and killing demons non-stop to gain experience. And within the Tower of Sin, Yolanda had been constantly fighting in the arena. Even though she'd had a lot of lucky light, she'd never attempted to refine it and always remained a war general. It had been as if she would never improve herself. He hadn't expected the Yolandas he had seen to be just clones. With so many clones cultivating separately and then being recollected together, how terrifying would Yolanda become? It was hard for Zen to imagine. He could only marvel at the wonders of the world. There were simply too many talents in the upper world to think of such an incredible method of cultivation. The speed of their travel was naturally many times higher now that they were flying rather than walking. Although the holy tree looked very far, everyone was able to reach it within 5 minutes. The members of the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place had received news of their queen's arrival in advance. Many of them were waiting on top of the huge holy tree. A crimson carpet was laid out along the thick trunk of the tree. At the end of the carpet stood a woman dressed in purple. Even though Zen and the woman were tens of thousands of feet apart, Zen could still feel the aura that she was emitting. The aura wasn't overbearing, but it gave off an incomparably heavy feeling, even much stronger than those of the ogre war sages and Eddie, who was at the life and death realm. Staring at the woman's figure, Zen had already guessed her identity. This woman was the leader of the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. She was also one of the powerful warriors at the Soul Sea realm. She was none other than Amber. Zen had seen her name on the talent tablet. Chapter 596, Statues. Warriors at the Soul Sea realm were at the top across the world. When one reached the life and death realm or became a war sage, they could threaten the stability of the word if they continued to increase their cultivation. They would encounter crises that would be matters of life and death. A life and death crisis was actually a punishment to someone posed by the world when it was threatened by him or her. Once warriors reached the Soul Sea realm, the punishments posed by the world could no longer hold them back, given their utmost strength. This was exactly why these warriors were expelled from this world and sent to the upper world. However, there were conditions that had to be met for a warrior at the Soul Sea realm to go to the upper world. Amber's talent was amazing, and she had only spent 200 years trying to reach the Soul Sea realm from being a nature creature. There was still a long time for her to go to the upper world. The holy tree began to shake once Zen and Lavender had descended upon the thick trunk. The holy tree was as large as a castle, and when it shook, it felt like there was an earthquake. Amber knelt down on one knee before Lavender and said in a respectful manner, "Welcome, my queen." Lavender nodded indifferently, the fact that a warrior at the Soul Sea realm was bowing before her making no change to her expression. It was as if she took it as a matter of course. Other powerful warriors at the Soul Sea realm followed Amber and knelt down in unison before Lavender, along with the other war sages of the Demon Knight. There were over 100,000 members of the Demon Knight kneeling at the same time on the holy tree. Every Demon Knight member was looking at Lavender with an incomparable piety. The three queens of the Demon Knight were supremely looked up to by all of the members. In millions of lower worlds, there were countless sacred places belonging to the Demon Knight, dedicated to them. But the three queens rarely visited the sacred places in person. Everyone belonging to the Heavenly Feather sacred place was overjoyed to see Lavender visiting their sacred place. The holy tree shook even more violently as its thick branches continued to swing. Zen could feel immense attraction to the holy tree, causing his feet to become firmly attached to it. No matter how hard the holy tree shook, he wouldn't be thrown down. As the holy tree continued to shake, clear veins began to be seen on its branches. Beams of green light flowed through the veins and converged on the trunk of the holy tree. The green light rose along the trunk and rapidly snaked its way to the branch where Zen was standing. At the end of the branch, the light began to gush out, enveloping Lavender. "What is this?" Zen exclaimed, his jaw dropping. "This is the holy tree's life energy," Cheryl explained. Splash! While the life energy was constantly being drawn out, the leaves on the holy tree started withering at a visible rate, as if winter had replaced spring in the blink of an eye. Zen noticed that not only was this huge holy tree withering, but even the plants around it were also turning yellow. Will the holy tree die if the life energy within it is completely extracted? Zen asked again, stunned at the sight of the withering holy tree. Cheryl replied, unperturbed and patient, "The holy tree's life energy is indeed very precious, and we normally do not draw much life energy out of it. Only when newborn babies are put on it every year do we draw a small amount of life energy out of it. But our queen's soul is very weak right now, and she is severely injured. We have no choice but to draw 90% of life energy out of the holy tree." Seeing that Zen was still astonished, Cheryl continued to explain, "It's all right. The holy tree is full of life energy. It's impossible for it to wither because of this. It will completely recover, at most in 2 to 3 years. "Ah, I see," Zen said, nodding in understanding. Lavender continued to absorb the holy tree's life energy. This kind of pure life energy was easy to absorb and a huge amount seemed to have been done in the blink of an eye. Once she had absorbed the life energy, Lavender lowered her head to look at Amber and said stiffly, "Get up. And take me to the queen's statues." "Yes, my queen," Amber said, bowing. Amber, who was the #1 talent of the Sea God continent and the leader of the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place, stood up and respectfully led the way for Lavender. Esther, Cheryl, Zen and the rest followed them. The other members of the Demon Knight remained prostrate on the ground. Amber led the way along the crimson carpet on the tree branch and soon approached the trunk of the holy tree. Inside the hollowed-out trunk was a palace. When Amber brought Lavender, Zen, and the others in, the other members who remained prostrate on the ground finally stood up. At this, the members of the Demon Knight erupted in joy. "I see the queen. She really is the queen. She's exactly the same as the statue. Why would the queen come to our Heavenly Feather Sacred Place? She is the queen of the killings. I remember that among the 3 statues, her statue seems to be the dimmest." "Shish, don't talk nonsense. You will be punished if anyone overhears you. Something must have happened in the upper world. Otherwise, our queen wouldn't be living in the body of a human male as his sword spirit." These speculations had already existed and had been making the rounds of the Heavenly Feather sacred place ever since Phoebe had notified them. The queens' statues shone with an eternal holy light that did not fade even at night. But the statue of the Queen of Killings had suddenly dimmed in recent years. An ominous sign. It was not only in the Heavenly Feather sacred place that Lavender's statue had dimmed, but her statues across other lower worlds had dimmed as well. Long before this, many members of the Demon Knight had guessed that something had happened to the Demon Knight in the upper world. Unfortunately, this was not something they could figure out. But due to Lavender's sudden arrival, they knew that they had guessed right. However, why she had come to be in this state was something that Amber and the others weren't qualified to ask. Lavender entered the huge palace and walked towards the center. There were 3 huge statues at the center, statues of women of the Demon Knight. These were all very lifelike, and each of the statues was emitting its own luster. The first statue held a huge scepter, its entire body sheathed in a faint green light. Just moving closer to it could make one feel the vigorous life energy pulsing within it. This is the queen controlling life of the Demon Knight, Cheryl reminded Zen as she saw Zen's gaze lingering on the statue. Zen nodded as his gaze shifted to the second statue. It was a woman wielding a murderous meteor hammer and was giving off a light blue light. It was hard to imagine the Demon Knight using such a barbaric and cruel weapon. She is the Queen of Punishment, Cheryl clarified. Oh, that explains it, Zen said, turning to look at the last statue. The last one was red, but the only difference was that the red light it was bathed in was very dim. It was far from being as dazzling as the lights that brightened the other 2 queens' statues. The third statue looked exactly like Lavender. No wonder the members of the Demon Knight were able to recognize Lavender as one of their queens in just a glance. It's true that she looks exactly the same, Zen thought to himself. But why was the statue holding a spear in its hand? Wasn't Lavender using a sword? Back then, Zen had accidentally obtained a sword spirit after entering the Killing Sword Mountain. The only place where Zen and Lavender had communicated was the Killing Sword Mountain. Since Lavender had entered the Killing Sword Mountain, she must be using a sword since she had already comprehended the consummate sword intent. But the statue showed that her weapon was a spear, not a sword. Zen was puzzled, and was just trying to figure things out when Lavender stopped in front of her statue, turned around, and said, "All of you can leave. Zen, stay behind. No one is allowed to enter the palace. It's an order." As Zen's sword spirit, she couldn't stay too far away from him. So naturally, Zen had to stay behind. "Yes, my queen. No one is allowed to approach the palace without your order." Amber nodded and quickly retreated from the palace, taking along Esther and the other warriors at the Soul Sea realm. Chapter 597, 2 Jerks. Now it was just Zen and his sword spirit in the empty palace. The innate queen's aura slowly vanished from Lavender's body. Now she was like an ordinary young member of the Demon Knight. After Lavender had spoken in the Tower of Sin, there hadn't been much interaction between her and Zen. He thought for a while before asking, "The weapon on this statue is a spear, so why is it that your sword was stuck in the Killing Sword Mountain?" "That is the heavenly fate, the holy spear of my clan. Before I turned 18, I was a swordsman," Lavender replied. So that explained it. Lavender's simple answer immediately solved the mystery in Zen's mind. If Lavender was the queen of the Demon Knight, then she should be able to climb the peak of the mountain with her powers. Surely she wouldn't just insert her sword halfway up the Killing Sword Mountain. Zen had assumed that when she had attained the consummate sword intent, her cultivation level was not very high, and therefore, she couldn't reach the mountaintop. "But why did you become like this?" Before Zen could complete his question, Lavender interrupted him. "There's no need to ask. You'll know in a while," she said without any emotion. She walked towards the azure blue statue and raised her hand. A faint ray of light emitted from her hand and a strange rune appeared in the light. She then slammed it down hard on the statue. Buzz! The statue glowed with a brilliant blue light. Zen's eyes had been baptized by the sap of the divine tree, so he was able to see the changes on the statue clearly despite the blinding blue light. "This is..." Zen's eyes were wide open. The statue seemed to be alive. She blinked her eyes a few times and the blue light gradually dimmed. Then, a faint smile appeared on her face. Lavender must be communicating with another queen of the Demon Knight, he guessed. It was possible that the many sacred places of the Demon Knight in the lower world maintained contact with the upper world through these 3 statues. This method was very useful. Although the upper world might not be able to transfer its resources to the lower world, it could at least convey classified information to the lower world, such as refinement techniques, through these statues. Was Lavender seeking the help of another queen? But that notion was dispelled when Zen heard Lavender speak to the statue in an unbelievably audacious tone. "Jerk, you didn't expect me to still be alive, right?" Lavender mocked. "Ha ha ha." The statue seemed to be alive as she covered her mouth and laughed. "You jerk, you aren't dead yet, huh? You still have one soul, and it's someone else's sword spirit." Zen could not believe what he was hearing. The azure blue statue queen was responsible for handing out punishments in the Demon Night, while Lavender was the one in charge of killings. Zen didn't expect these two to be abusive towards each other like a couple of shrews. How could Zen endure this? No wonder Lavender had ordered all her clansmen to leave the palace. However, she didn't care about what Zen thought at all. Her face was contorted with fury. "So what? I only need one soul to kill a hussy like you." The statue sized up Lavender, her face carrying a hint of ridicule. "Your real body has been destroyed by me. How can you kill me? Oh, I remember. Now you're a sword spirit. You used to be a swordsman, so your soul must have been hiding in the Killing Sword Mountain, right? You're attached to the body of a human boy at the Internal Elixir Realm. In your current persona, I'm afraid that you can't leave the world you are in, let alone fight your way back." The statue's words pierced Lavender's heart. Her expression darkened and a cold smile spread on her face. "Oh, really, jerk, look at the person beside me, and tell me whether I can leave this world or not." The statue turned her head slightly and looked at Zen. "Ha, he's just a human at the Internal Elixir Realm. Do you think that?" The statue looked at Zen carefully and the words left her lips. The conversation suddenly came to a halt. "Jerk, open your eyes and look carefully." Lavender sneered. The smug smile that had appeared on the statue queen slowly disappeared, and was replaced by resentment. "I really didn't think that your luck would be so good. You have actually met someone who has the fate to lead the world of chaos." "Ha ha, why, are you jealous of me? You jerk," Lavender cursed coldly. The statue shouted hysterically, "Yes. I'm jealous of you. I've been jealous of you since we were young. Why are you always luckier than me? I'm not inferior to you in any way, but the things you get are always better than mine. That was why I had to destroy you. So what if you find a man who has the fate to lead the world of chaos? You no longer have the ability to turn the tables." Lavender snorted derisively, "We will see. We'll see. Do you think I'm going to give a jerk like you a chance?" said the statue, raising her eyebrow. The statue queen suddenly moved. She swung the meteor hammer in her hand towards Zen. Zen felt like his head was about to explode with all the swearing that was going on between the two queens. He didn't expect the statue to attack him, and it actually gave him a fright. Just as the meteor hammer was about to touch Zen's head, his eyes flashed and he suddenly swerved his body, avoiding the blow. However, a huge crater had appeared on the ground. After the statue pulled the hammer out of the crater, a few of the spikes on the hammer broke. The statue queen wasn't a fairy or sacred weapon after all. Hard weapons like that couldn't be carved. She had used Thurgy to attach herself to the statue, but because of her material, she wasn't a big threat to Zen. When the statue brought the meteor hammer down a second time, Zen threw out a punch, smashing it to pieces. However, he didn't say anything at this point. The grudge between these two women was a bit strange for him. It would be unwise for him to get involved. "Give me the sword." Lavender stretched out her hand towards Zen. Zen understood that she wanted the huge black sword of the Blood Fiend Emperor. He nodded and threw it to her. Lavender jumped up with the sword in hand and floated above the statue's head. She clicked her tongue twice before speaking. "You want to kill someone who has the fate to lead the world of chaos with this dumb statue? Jerk, you've always been so naive." The statue snorted. "So what? In the end, I won. As soon as I kill your last soul, the Demon Knight will choose a new queen of killings, and you will become history." "Oh yeah, give it your best shot, hussy," Lavender challenged. She raised the huge sword high up and hacked down the statue's head. The statue was split into two and the broken pieces fell onto the ground. Only half of the statue was left, but she still spoke. "Then I'll be waiting for you. You bloody..." Crack! The black sword smashed the remaining half of the statue's head into pieces. Lavender stabbed the sword heavily into the ground. Her anger dissipated and she looked at Zen miserably. Zen stood there agape. He really didn't know what to say. After a while, Zen asked, You came here just to fight with her, didn't you?" Lavender nodded. "Yes," she admitted frankly. Hearing their squabble, Zen was certain that Lavender had come here looking for a fight, but he had never heard of such a bizarre way of fighting. But, Zen threw up his hands and looked at Lavender's face. He wanted to say something to comfort her, but he didn't know what had happened between Lavender and that woman. "You'll help me, won't you?" Lavender stared blankly at Zen. This was the first time she had ever asked him for a favor. This was an internal conflict of the Demon Knight. It was definitely not a good idea for Zen to get involved. The Demon Knight race wasn't inferior to the genuine dragon. The three statues in front of him were the queens of the Demon Knight, and their strength was beyond anything Zen could imagine. "I'm afraid I'm not strong enough," Zen replied, shaking his head. Although he had just stepped into the War General level, he was obviously not powerful enough. Not to mention the queen responsible for punishments, even Amber of the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place and many other warriors of the Soul Sea realm could crush him with a single finger. Lavender stared at Zen and said, "It's true that you're not powerful enough now, but you are the most important chess piece in this game and will eventually return to your position." Chapter 598, Chess Piece. "I'm just a chess piece?" Zen asked in bewilderment. "Right, the greatest era of this world has begun. Many talents have appeared in this world, but it is you who have the fate to lead the world of chaos. As long as you do not die, you will inevitably become the main character of this great world," Lavender said, her face serious. Zen had always had trouble understanding the great world of chaos. Both the Cyan Dragon and Mist were keeping this matter a secret from him. Every time they spoke of a crucial point pertaining to it, they broke off, unwilling to continue talking about it. Even Zen, with his access to their conversations, was unable to understand the whole truth. "The beginning of a new great world. What does it mean?" Zen asked again. Lavender threw him an annoyed look. "Don't you see that there are many geniuses in this era? Even within this boundless world, there are countless talents that appear out of the blue. Moreover, there are over 1,000,000 boundless worlds and many upper worlds with talents beyond count." Zen nodded in agreement as he heard what she had to say. Zen had come across all sorts of geniuses on his way from the Cloud Sect. The Cloud Sect was only a small second-grade sect. It was always rare to see a warrior master the successful sword intent in the All Peaks competition. And no swordsman had ever gained the consummate sword intent. But last time, 2 such talents had appeared in the All Peaks competition that was held in the Cloud Sect. One was Zen, and the other was Rocher. In addition to the Cloud Sect, all sorts of divine-level talents had appeared in the later martial arts contest that had taken place because of the Dragon Soar Arena. According to the distribution of talents in the central region, as long as a divine-level genius didn't meet his downfall, he could be destined to enter the Soul Sea realm. But in all these years, not a single Soul Sea realm master had appeared in the central region. So it wasn't just Zen who felt it strange. Members of the other sects in the central region were also wondering what was going on in this world. Lavender's explanation helped Zen finally understand that the great world was coming. "I need you to help me," Lavender said, staring at Zen with fierce determination. But what she said next was unexpected. "Please," she said tentatively. It was beyond anyone's imagination that a mighty queen of the Demon Knight, one who represented slaughter, would beg someone for help. Zen's heart raced as he looked at Lavender's determined yet helpless expression. He knew that agreeing to Lavender's request was not wise. After all, she only had a sliver of soul left. Plus, she might still be worshipped in the lower world, but if they went back to the upper world, Zen might have to face and deal with the force of the entire Demon Knight. And it was possible that this race was stronger than humans. Zen hesitated as this thought hit him. As she saw Zen's expression change with his thoughts, Lavender became disappointed. She pursed her lips and said mournfully, "I understand that. I'm just your sword spirit, not your sister. And I'm also not someone you care about. And to you, I'm still an alien." Lavender was Zen's sword spirit, and given the fact that she had been hiding inside Zen's body the entire time, she naturally knew everything that had happened to Zen along the way. She knew that Zen would go all out to help even if he had to risk his own life if she were his sister, Yan, or Letitia from the Cloud Hall, or even Aura from the Burning Sky Empire. He wasn't heartless or indifferent by a huge margin. Lavender had only been Zen's sword spirit all that time, so there wasn't much of a relationship between them. Out of the blue, an old voice sounded from Zen's mind, "Little girl, Zen can help you." Zen did want to help Lavender but was hesitant. The path of cultivation was an arduous one, filled with blood and gore. And even if he was very lucky, it was possible that one wrong step would mean that he would perish. Not to mention that his fate dictated that he had to lead the great world of chaos. But even if his luck was greater than anything, he would still die. It was said that the divine-level talents were able to reach the Soul Sea realm. But how many of them could actually reach the Soul Sea realm? Probably not even 1 in 100. There was one big prerequisite that was required of a divine-level talent if he had to become a Soul Sea realm master, and that was not to perish. Could Zen become the main character of this era? The precondition of not dying would still exist. How could Zen agree to it when he knew that he would be facing a race that was more powerful than humans? Zen's hesitation was cut short by the cyan dragon in his mind, who suddenly helped him answer. Zen was puzzled. The cyan dragon was exceptionally intelligent and known for his extensive knowledge. Since he had overridden Zen in agreeing to Lavender's request, he naturally must have a reason or a profound meaning behind it. Lavender wasn't surprised at the voice floating in Zen's mind. Although she was Zen's sword spirit and couldn't enter his mind, she knew that Zen had turned to the cyan dragon's soul for help several times when he had drawn the divine texture in the past. Given that Lavender had a wide knowledge and a vast range of experiences, she was sure that the soul belonged to the cyan dragon. Lavender's gaze rested on Zen as she heard the voice and she addressed the cyan dragon. It's no use, your agreement. Only Zen's word counts. Zen, just promise her. The demon knight will be of great help and endless benefit to you in the future if you can help her return to her throne, the cyan dragon said flatly. What I care about is not benefit, Zen said seriously. Moreover, Lavender, you have saved my life so many times as my sword spirit. I can't promise you too much, but if I can do anything for you in the future, I will help you. Lavender's previously gloomy face lit up at Zen's words, as if a ray of light was shining directly on her. She stared at him before lowering her head and saying, "Thank you." Zen smiled slightly and said teasingly, "But you are still my sword spirit. You can't possibly continue to be my sword spirit and be attached to my body all the time, right? I will find a way to reconstruct my body, but I can't do it right now," Lavender said after a moment's thought. It was inconvenient for Lavender to do many things, since she was just a sword spirit at the moment. But her advantage was obvious. She could recover even if she were chopped into pieces. And as long as Zen did not die, she would not die. But she could only hide within Zen's body. If she ever came out of Zen's body and revealed herself, she would have to be near Zen. Reconstructing her body, on the other hand, was not a simple matter. Whether there was a chance for her to do so depended solely on her luck. Lavender realized something suddenly and said to Zen, "Isn't your biggest goal to save your sister? I can order Amber to bring the Demon Knight members to the central region to help you kill Eddie." "Help me kill Eddie?" Zen's eyebrows shot up. Lavender's suggestion was worth giving a shot to. Eddie's cultivation base was at the life and death realm, and he had only been through 3 life and death crises. His strength might probably only be equivalent to that of a 3rd-level war sage. There were at least 1,000,000 3rd-level war sages in the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place alone. Even though Eddie was much stronger than a normal war sage, there were still Soul Sea Realm masters like Amber in the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. With their combined strength, they could easily kill Eddie. If Zen were to bring this group of members from the Demon Knight's Sacred Place back to the Central Region, he would be able to defeat every sect in the Central Region. The difference between a Sacred Place and a 5th-grade sect was very great. But the gap between an ordinary sect and the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place was even greater because the latter was a 7th-grade Sacred Place. Zen still shook his head, his eyes determined. Eddie has already become an obstacle of my warrior spirit. As for this obstacle, I'll have to deal with him myself. Although the warrior spirit could not increase a warrior's combat strength, it was still undeniably important for a warrior. If Zen's warrior spirit didn't move on smoothly, it would gradually overcome him with depression and despair. It would, in the end, become his inner spirit demon and the biggest obstacle of his whole life. This kind of hindrance would prevent Zen's cultivation from progressing at best and cause him to go wrong in his martial arts cultivation and spiral into madness at critical moments at worst. Back when Eddie had turned into a giant face above the Cloud sect, Zen had sworn to himself that he would take Eddie's life with his own hands. "I won't ask others to help me kill Eddie. I will kill him personally," Zen said, shaking his head. Lavender was experienced enough to understand the meaning of Zen's words. Since Zen had already promised her his help, her goal had already been achieved to a certain extent. She was the queen of killings, but her true body had been destroyed by someone else in a moment of carelessness where she had lost everything. Now that the strand of her soul did not dissipate, the light around her statue did not extinguish even though it was dim. The rules of the Demon Knight dictated that they would only select a different queen to take charge of killings only if the light in their queen's statue disappeared completely. As long as this strand of her soul was not destroyed, she still had a sliver of hope to turn things around. And all her hopes were pinned on Zen. So from now on, Lavender would fully cooperate with Zen. Lavender walked to the entrance of the palace and let the Demon Knight members who were waiting outside enter. Amber and the other members of the Demon Knight were shocked as they saw the broken statue and the gigantic black sword sticking out of its side. The queen's statue was holy for the Demon Knight. It wasn't because the statue was made of precious materials, but because these statues were their faith. In other circumstances, anybody who as much as accidentally touched the queen's statues would receive the harshest of punishments. But here it was now, broken into pieces. How could something of this importance not cause them to be startled? But the huge black sword was Lavender's weapon. Many members of the Demon Knight had seen Lavender's sword in the Tower of Sin before. It looked like their queen had broken this statue herself. But why? Could it be some kind of a dispute between the two queens? Amber and the other Soul Sea Realm Masters thought all of this, but they didn't dare ask Lavender about what had happened. Zen laughed inwardly as he saw the shock registered on their faces. You must be very surprised looking at the two queens of the Demon Knight scolding each other like two bad-tempered women, he thought. Clean up the area and don't erect this statue here again, Lavender said coldly. She had regained her lofty and aloof expression, now that the other members were here. Don't put it here anymore. Why? Amber asked, astonished. The statues of the three queens had to stand there together. Not a single one could be moved, which was a rule of all sacred lands of the Demon Knight. And Lavender's order had confused everyone. Anyone else would be instantly killed if they were to say something like this. But now that their queen had spoken thus, everyone had no choice but to obey her order. They could not blame or punish her for it. Lavender thought for a moment and then sighed. Forget it, just make another one and remember to make it a little uglier. Zen almost laughed out loud at Lavender's words. This woman was too scary. Once she developed a grudge against someone, she would not stop working against her enemy until her enemy had been killed. Amber and the rest, on the other hand, had fear and trepidation writ large on their faces, seemingly at a loss of what to do. Lavender walked calmly in front and Zen followed her. The senior leaders of the Demon Knight followed closely behind. This Demon Knight Queen's behavior with the Demon Knight members was completely different from her behavior with Zen. The huge holy tree was hollowed out in the middle, inside which was a 100-story palace. Amber led Zen into the Demon Knight's sacred place's treasure house to pick out a weapon. The sword of the Blood Fiend Emperor was huge and powerful, but it wasn't at too high a level. What was more, when Lavender had fought with Cheryl in the Tower of Sin, Cheryl had grabbed her sword, leaving several deep grooves on it. It could be used appropriately, but it also could break at any point in time. So Lavender needed to choose a new weapon now. The number of resources and treasures that a 7th grade sacred place had far exceeded those that the Cloud Hall and the Ethereal Spirit sect had. In the central region, low-grade sacred weapons were already extremely rare, but not in the Sea God continent. So when the ogres intended to use 10 sacred weapons in exchange for Zen's life in the Tower of Sin, Fabian had immediately refused it. They traveled from the top to the bottom. After passing through a huge root of the holy tree, Zen finally arrived at the Demon Knight's treasure house. Zen couldn't help but sigh emotionally as he entered the treasure house. A huge luminous pearl stood at the center of the treasure house, emitting a gentle light. Over a dozen long swords were inserted around this pearl. All of these treasures were sacred weapons. My queen, the best weapon in our Heavenly Feather's sacred place is a weapon that is at the top grade of the sacred level, Amber said as a way of introduction. Let me have a look, Lavender said flatly. Amber nodded, bringing Zen and Lavender to the back of the luminous pearl. She extended a hand and gently pulled out a long box from the ground. She opened it and pulled out a long sword from it. The sword was light golden in color and its blade shone with a quaint light that made it look like a vintage article. This treasured sword at the top grade of sacred level was obtained from the Dark Nether Cave. I am not proficient in using a sword, which is why I sealed it here, said Amber. It's a great sword, Zen exclaimed, his eyes lighting up in pleasant surprise. What kind of opportunities did the Dark Nether Cave have for a weapon at the top grade of the sacred level to have originated there? Lavender looked at the sword indifferently. After a moment, she stretched out one of her slender fingers. Amber held the long sword in both hands and respectfully passed it to Lavender, before retreating to the side. Lavender flexed her fingers around the hilt and gently brandished the sword before shaking her head. I don't need this sword. I'll give it to Zen. Amber's face fell at Lavender's words. She wondered why Lavender had even thought of giving such a top-grade sacred sword to a human war general. Although Amber knew that Lavender and Zen had become inseparable companions and that Lavender couldn't leave Zen, Amber had spent all her strength in the dark nether cave to obtain this treasured sword. She had almost died there. And now such a sword was about to be handed to a human warrior, and that made her unhappy. She felt the morbidity overtake her heart and discomfort at the fact. Can't I give it to Zen? Lavender said, noticing Amber's unwillingness. Amber immediately lowered her head and said, it is your decision as to who you want to gift it to. Lavender nodded, and passed it to Zen. The Demon Knight had 3 queens as their core because Lavender and the other 2 queens belonged to the faith of the Demon Knight. And members of the Demon Knight obeyed their queens all the time, without even thinking of rebelling. Even if Lavender ordered Amber to kill herself right now, she would not disobey. From this perspective, the Demon Knight was completely different from the human race. Humans didn't know absolute obedience. So long as the benefits of betrayal were great, even father and son could betray each other. Belonging to the same race wasn't even a reason not to. So this meant that the members of the Demon Knight were far more united than the human race. In the central region, different sects would attack each other to fight for their own benefit. It was impossible for something like this to happen in the Demon Knight. Zen's heart thumped wildly as he received the sword. A top-grade sacred sword, and he was getting it just like that. He had a low-grade sacred weapon, but as a warrior, he was eager to get his hands on some better treasured weapons. I don't need a sword now. Lavender shook her head and said, I want to use my original weapon. I want a spear. Lavender had used a sword as a kid. But when she had been chosen to be the queen of the Demon Knight and began to take charge of killings, she began using the spear. The time she had spent using the spear was naturally much longer than what she had spent using the sword. It was also much easier for her to use a spear. At the time, Zen had thought that Lavender was just his sword spirit, so he had naturally given the sword to Lavender. However, only a spear would be able to make Lavender show the full force of her power. Amber nodded and stretched her hand. An invisible force swept out and a silver spear spiraled over to them from a box in the distance. This spear is the best in the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. Please have a look, Amber said as she handed the spear to Lavender. This spear was of a grade that was inferior to that of Zen's sword. It was not at a low grade but at the middle grade of the sacred level. Lavender reached out to hold the silver spear in her hand and looked it over. Finally, she thrust the spear into the air. A wave of energy burst out, crackling through the air. Not only did the energy wave frighten Zen, it stunned even Amber, who was at the Soul Sea realm. Even though Lavender was just Zen's sword spirit, her strength had grown along with that of the spirit's master. And though the sword spirit's cultivation base couldn't be graded, it just might be on par with Zen's cultivation, even a little lower than his. Lavender's spear strike could not hurt Amber since she was at the Soul Sea realm. But right now, Amber was unable to comprehend the spear intent and momentum that Lavender had mastered. After all, Lavender's cultivation base was very high, far more than this, and what she had comprehended was far beyond what Amber could reach. Chapter 599, Restrain Themselves. Lavender pulled back the silver spear and held it in her hand, rather satisfied with her new weapon. Seeing Zen's startled expression, she said calmly, It's a pity that you focus on practicing the sword. Otherwise, I can teach you some spear arts of the Demon Knight. Although Lavender had focused on practicing the sword too before the age of 20, the sword techniques she had cultivated at that time weren't the best techniques of the Demon Knight. Her swordsmanship was no better than the swordsmanship Zen had mastered. Moreover, it was difficult for a man like Zen to perform the graceful sword dance. However, Lavender's spear arts was extraordinary. It was one of the most quintessential and unique techniques of Demon Knight. Zen blinked in response. Since he had chosen to practice the sword out of all the weapons, he wouldn't give up so easily. It wasn't good for martial artists to be greedy with the hope to master various kinds of weapons at the same time. Moreover, if Zen started to practice the spear, he would have to temper himself to comprehend the spear intent starting from scratch. That was something he certainly didn't want to do. However, when Amber heard what Lavender had said, she felt differently. It was impossible for any of the 3 queens of the Demon Knight to pass down their secret techniques to others. The other 2 queens of the Demon Knight wouldn't be able to master Lavender's unique technique either. But it seemed to Amber that the queen didn't mind teaching an outsider the unique technique of the Demon Knight. It was strange. And together with the broken statue she'd seen in the palace, Amber guessed that something must have happened in the upper world. Unfortunately, she couldn't figure out what it was. Amber might be a leader of the 7th grade sacred place, but even after a Soul Sea Realm warrior like her ascended to the upper world, she was still nothing in the Demon Knight in the upper world. At most, she could only be considered the leader of a squad. As for the battle between the queens, Amber wasn't qualified to get involved, unless she could grow and become a master of the Demon Knight in the upper world. Amber had already taken the test on the talent tablet and managed to get her name listed on the 2nd row. Although such an achievement was extraordinary in the Sea God continent, it was nothing in the upper world. Back when she'd taken the test in the talent tablet, 5 names had ranked above hers. Now, 2 more names had appeared above hers, Zen and Yolanda. Although Amber wasn't in the Tower of Sin, many of the sacred places had their spies travel between the sacred places and the Tower of Sin to monitor every move in the Tower of Sin and bring back every piece of information. So of course, Amber already knew that Zen had kicked 2 ogre war sages out of the Tower of Sin in an instant. The human kid in front of her was someone to be reckoned with. If Zen had the ability to kick any living creature out of the Tower of Sin, then he was technically the controller of the Tower of Sin. All the races in the Sea God continent relied on the Tower of Sin to grow. Even Amber couldn't have gotten to where she was today without the help of the Tower of Sin. She had relied on the tower to improve her cultivation level and bring out her talent to the fullest. At the same time, through the Tower of Sin, she had obtained great opportunities in the Dark Nether Cave and reached her current status. I've chosen my weapon, Zen. You can continue to choose some weapons for yourself, Lavender said as she handed the long spear to Zen and let him store it in his space ring. She was still just Zen's sword spirit, so she was unable to store anything on her own. She would only summon the spear when it was needed. The idea of getting a spear for herself had come today as she understood that Zen would be facing more and more pressure in the future. With Lavender's current strength, she might not be able to display even 1,000th of the strength she'd had in the past, but this spear would be enough to help Zen turn the tides in a battle at a critical moment. This was all that Lavender could do for Zen. Although Zen already had a top-grade sacred weapon with him, after hearing what Lavender said, he still looked around to check if there was something suitable for him. Looking at the variety of fairy weapons and sacred weapons in the place, Zen shook his head before asking, "Do you have any top-grade crystals?" Crystals. Hearing Zen's request, Amber frowned in confusion. Crystals were usually used to be embedded on weapons. Was Zen a weapon refiner? Was he asking for crystals for the purpose of refining weapons? But of course, Zen wasn't a weapon refiner. Back in the White Emperor City, he had obtained 2 crystals which were now embedded in his arms. These 2 crystals had been of great help to Zen. The original purpose of the Phoenix Crystal was to be embedded within a weapon to reduce the weapon's weight, making the weapon more agile and move faster. After Zen had embedded the Phoenix Crystal in his arm, it had proven to have the ability to greatly enhance his speed. Back when Zen was a nature creature, the Phoenix Crystal had been able to greatly increase his speed. However, it was of little help now as Zen's speed had already reached a very high level. As for the Emerald Crystal, although the energy contained within it could destroy enchanted barriers, the enchanted barriers that Zen usually encountered these days were the ones that could trap war generals and warlords. A single Emerald Crystal was not powerful enough to destroy those enchanted barriers. So, Zen had been looking for an opportunity to replace the crystals embedded in his arms. Since Lavender had asked him to choose anything he wanted, he didn't want to let this chance slip by. It wouldn't be a big deal for a prominent 7th grade sacred place to take out 2 top-grade crystals. Yes, I'm talking about the kind of crystals that can be embedded in the blade. Zen nodded. Do you want to put crystals in your weapons? Amber asked curiously. Sort of. Zen knew that he himself could be considered a weapon, so his answer wasn't completely false. Amber nodded to the war sage of the Demon Knight beside her. The war sage then walked toward a corner of the treasury. Amber would personally go and fetch weapons for Lavender as she was the queen of the Demon Knight. However, as a powerful master in the Soul Sea realm, Amber would not serve Zen herself. It didn't take long before the war sage took out a brocade box from the corner of the treasury. The brocade box was filled with crystals of different colors, shapes, and sizes. Some of these crystals are fire-condensing crystals from the depths of an active volcano while some are purple cloud crystals from the deep-sea abyss. Their effects are different. How many of them do you need to match your sacred or fairy weapons? Amber assumed that either Zen was a weapon refiner or that he had a friend who was a weapon refiner. If he was going to use the crystals for weapon refining, he would need at least 10 to 20 of them, since the success rate of weapon refining wasn't 100%. However, Zen's reply surprised Amber. 2, he said. Only 2. Amber was becoming more and more curious about what Zen needed these crystals for. Of course, Zen wouldn't tell her that he was going to embed these crystals in his own body. After the War Sage of the Demon Knight explained the uses and benefits of each of the crystals to Zen, Zen picked 2 crystals that he thought would work best for him. Back then, Zen had chosen the Phoenix crystal because his shortcoming lay in his speed. However, now, with the explosive power of the forceful energy and his comprehension of the space law, his speed was no longer something he needed to be concerned over. The 2 crystals Zen picked now would also benefit him in some way. After selecting those 2 crystals, Zen had no other requests. Then, Amber led Zen and Lavender to leave the place. Lavender's purpose of going to the Heavenly Feather sacred place was to argue with the queen who was in charge of the punishment. However, Zen hadn't come here in vain. He had obtained a top-grade sacred weapon and replaced the 2 crystals in his arms. 2 days later, Zen left the Heavenly Feather sacred place together with Esther and Cheryl. They were headed to the Tower of Sin once again. During these 2 days, Amber had clearly indicated to Zen that if he wanted to wipe out the ogres from the Tower of Sin, the Demon Knight would do everything in their power to help. The ogre race was not a friendly race. They were born killers and were very violent, which was the complete opposite of the Demon Knight, who loved peace and order. Moreover, whether it was in the Tower of Sin or in the God Sea continent, the ogres always acted against the Demon Knight. It was only after Amber had led the Heavenly Feather sacred place to power that the ogres had begun restraining themselves. If there was an opportunity to get rid of the ogres, Amber would definitely not let it go. As a powerful master at the Soul Sea realm and the leader of the Demon Knight, Amber would not show mercy to the ogres. This was what the world was like. To be kind to her enemies was to be cruel to herself. After passing through the transmission array, Zen once again returned to the Tower of Sin. The 2 gates of the Tower of Sin that had been smashed by the Ogre War Sages had already been repaired. Before Zen had left, the only warriors who had known about what had happened on the 10th floor had been the warriors who had witnessed it. However, in the few days that Zen had spent in the Heavenly Feather sacred place, the news of how Zen had defeated the Ogre War Sages had spread through all the floors in the Tower of Sin. All the creatures already knew what had happened that day. No one knew who had spread this information or whether it had been spread intentionally. However, during this period of time, the ogres in the Tower of Sin had indeed restrained themselves quite a bit. Chapter 600. The way Zen went to the 10th floor. When Zen stepped onto the 1st floor of the Tower of Sin, many creatures of various races stared at him with eyes filled with reverence. However, the eyes of the many ogre war fighters were only filled with unbridled fear. Even though Zen was a human war general less than 20 years old and had only been in the Tower of Sin for 3 months, he had already turned the tables for the entire human race. Despite being just a mere war general who used to be a war fighter when he had first entered the Tower of Sin, he had rendered the top-level warlords helpless, and had even used the power of the cursed land to indirectly kill 2 ogre war sages. No one in their right mind would attribute those to luck and coincidence. Regardless of the process, Zen had indeed succeeded and had thoroughly suppressed the arrogance of the ogres. In the past, from the 1st floor to the 14th floor of the Tower of Sin, regardless of whether it was an ogre war fighter or an ogre war general, they were all superior to other creatures. Their powerful race had more seats in the Tower of Sin than any other race, and they also had the most powerful forces on the Sea God continent. Also, no creature dared to confront the ogres head-on. Apart from the Demon Knight, the other races could only clench their fists in anger in front of them. The reason why the ogres were so arrogant was that they were the most powerful race on the Sea God continent. However, the ogres had been very restrained recently. From war fighters to war generals, and even warlords, their voices were not as loud as they had been in the past. One could even find a trace of fear and uncertainty on their faces as of late. It was because they didn't know what Zen was going to do to them when he returned to the Tower of Sin. Would he drive all the ogres out of the tower? Or would he just kill them all? Zen seemed to have used some kind of power to expel the 2 powerful ogre war sages out of the Tower of Sin. But whether or not Zen could use the power of the Tower of Sin to exterminate the creatures in the tower, or whether he had any other methods, everything would still depend on how well Zen controlled the tower. The outsiders couldn't figure it out. After all, the Tower of Sin itself was very mysterious. The creatures on the Sea God continent didn't know its origins or the secrets of the cursed land. In short, ever since Zen did what he did, the ogres had been acting like struggling fishes on a chopping board. They were in such a tricky situation. Now, as for whether they would fight Zen or would instead try to make peace with him, everyone could only wait and see. After entering the first floor of the Tower of Sin, Zen looked at Esther and the rest and suddenly said, with a smile on his lips, "You take the stairs. I want to take another way." Esther, Cheryl and the other members of the Demon Knight looked at Zen with a strange expression. There was only one path to the lower floors of the Tower of Sin, and that was to take the stairs. They didn't understand why Zen said there was another way. The moment Zen finished what he was saying, a circular crack that seemed to only allow one person to fall in appeared beneath his feet. Standing directly on top of it, Zen fell through when it opened. Seeing this scene, all of the top-level warlords, including Esther, were stunned. How could Zen play like this in the Tower of Sin? Bang! Zen landed firmly on the second floor. Many warfighters on the second floor were shocked when the ceiling suddenly cracked open and a human general fell from the crack. Zen shot the warfighters an indifferent glance before another round crack appeared beneath his feet. And it went on, the third floor, fourth, fifth, sixth. Every floor had a crack in it. Zen's body continued to fall vertically. Within just a few seconds, his feet finally landed on the floor of the 10th floor. From the 3rd to the 9th floor, the war fighters and war generals only saw a shadow shooting down, and they didn't have any idea who it was. After Zen arrived at the 10th floor, the cracks of the previous floors he had been in began moving and quickly disappeared, leaving behind the stupefied expressions of all the creatures who saw them. "Hey, did you see that? Yeah, it seems like a human was falling down a hole. This, I'm afraid that was truly the fastest way to go to any floor in the Tower of Sin." Even the top-level warlords on the 15th floor had to climb the stairs to go to another floor. During the battle between the warlords, there was a time when the ceiling was broken and a warlord fell to the next floor. While the floors of the Tower of Sin had the ability to heal themselves, they weren't particularly sturdy. But no warlord had dared to break through one in order to go to another floor. In the arena on the 10th floor, a nimble figure was flying about. It was Olivia, a divine-level talent of the human race. Her opponent was a giant who was nearly 40 feet tall. Olivia practiced the cultivation method with the ice attribute. The cold air formed rings that surrounded the giant one after another. The giants of the sea god continent were all incomparably powerful. Even if an ogre was punched by a giant, he would be smashed into minced meat, let alone a human. But as scary as the giants could be, their weakness was very obvious. They were too slow, and they couldn't keep up with their opponents most of the time, mainly because of their sizes. Now, under the constant suppression of Olivia's ice rings, the giant's speed was even slower. Although the iron rod in his hand was constantly swinging, it couldn't even come anywhere near her. When Olivia saw Zen suddenly appear on the 10th floor, her eyes sparkled and a smile appeared on her face. As life vitality flashed between her eyebrows, the cold energy suddenly erupted from her body. A pair of wings of ice formed behind her, and she turned into a streak of light as she charged towards the giant. Maybe it was because she wanted to show how powerful she was to impress Zen, or perhaps it was because she was excited to leave the arena to meet him. She directly used her trump card. As a divine-level talent, Olivia was one of the best warriors on the 10th floor. There was no need to use her trump card when dealing with this giant. Swift Ice Feather. At that moment, Olivia was like a fairy in the snow, swiftly floating towards the giant. Facing the oncoming iron rod, she made a strange turn in the air, easily dodging the powerful strike from her opponent. Immediately after, her figure rapidly approached the giant. When she reached him, she extended her snow-white hand and lightly stroked the giant's neck. A seed of ice and snow was instantly planted within it. Crack! The neck of the giant flashed with a white light, and an icy frost immediately blossomed, creating a beautiful ice flower. At the same time, the blood vessels in the giant's arms, chest, and legs started cracking. The moment blood came out from the giant's body, it was frozen. Plop! The giant's incomparably huge body crashed onto the floor. Olivia was standing firmly at the side of the arena, watching her attack take effect. A ray of lucky light shot out from the giant's body, shooting towards the token on her chest. Pock! 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 A clear round of applause for her rang out. Slowly walking towards the arena, Zen stretched out his hands to clap with the spectators. At that moment, the eyes of all the creatures on the 10th floor were focused on him. In the days following Zen's departure, many humans had already felt the subtle changes in the Tower of Sin. In this situation, even a fool would understand that the human race was on the verge of rising up. In the past, as long as humans stepped into the arena, they would encounter endless ridicule and hostility from other races. Their opponents would also never show mercy to them. Humans were likely to get severely injured or killed by their opponents in the arena. In the past few days, however, whenever humans walked into the arena, their opponents would always be extremely cautious. Even if humans were defeated, their opponents would not take advantage of the victory to pursue and take their lives. This change caused many of the humans to become overjoyed. It was very clear that this change originated from one person, and that person was Zen. Although the human race still only had 4 seats, it wouldn't be long before that number would increase. Every human was excited for how far the human race could grow. At first, all of that seemed like it would depend on how far the ogres would be willing to give in. Now, however, it seemed like it solely depended on how Zen would behave. And on that gracious day, Zen had finally returned. When Olivia saw Zen clapping his hands, a smile appeared on her lips. She then quickly jumped off the arena and walked towards him.